Chapter 576. In the direction of the Holy Ji Palace, even those big figures were a bit shocked. They clearly didn't think Futian could reach this step. In the direction of the Holy Ji Palace, even those big figures were a bit shocked. They clearly didn't think Futian could reach this step. So many prides from all over the barren state had come for the Holy Road. The list of perfection wasn't exactly the best of the best in the barren state because there were still people above the realm. But they were definitely the best of those in the lower noble plane. The three that were left had quite interesting planes. Huang Zhouge had the highest cultivation with the grade 7 noble plane. Bai Zai was a grade 8 noble. Futian was a grade 9 noble. Each one was in a different plane. Futian was the lowest, but he'd fought the entire way to Huang Zhouge and Bai Zai. This was definitely shocking. Many big figures were already wondering if they could get Futian to be their own disciple. With his potential, he would definitely be in the Barren Sky ranking in the future. Elder Ning was extremely uncomfortable. Seeing Futian at this step made him realize that no one could stop Futian from entering the Holy Ji Palace. As long as he was willing, any headmaster would accept him. In this case, it would be hard to take revenge for Ning Huang and kill Futian. Futian and Yu Shang had two abilities to travel the Holy Road. But Ning Huang had provoked him. The consequences were predictable. At this moment, Futian walked to his spot and stood there quietly. Instead of continuing to challenge, he looked in Bai Zai's direction. None of the remaining three stepped out. Bai Zai smiled suddenly. Was Futian copying him? But did he even qualify to do so? Raising his head, Bai Zai looked towards the steps and said, "Senior, since there are only 3 left, why don't we fight together?" Hearing his words, everyone was surprised and stared hard at him. How confident was he in his own abilities? If the 3 fought at the same time and one was stronger than the other 2, it would be 2 against 1. Judging by Bai Zai's arrogance, he must have thought that he was the strongest. Since he thought this and dared to say those words, did this mean that he wasn't intimidated by Futian and Huang Zhouge partnering up? Was Bai Zai confident in fighting the other 2 of the list of perfection? The elder on the stairs gazed at Huang Zhouge and Futian. "What do you two think?" he asked. "I have no objections." Huang Zhouge's voice was calm. Since Bai Zai had suggested it, he would follow no matter what. "What about you?" The elder looked at Futian. Futian smiled and nodded. "Sure." The 3 all agreed. "In that case, step onto the battle podium together. For the list of perfection there are no rules. Fight as you please," the elder said calmly. This seemed to be setting them free. Bai Zai, Huang Zhouge, and Futian all stepped forward at once. They walked towards different spots on the battleground. Countless eyes fell on them, feeling shaken. Many hearts even sped up. The list of perfection hadn't fought one-on-one. Instead, the 3 would fight together. How would the final battle be? Who would be the first to be eliminated? Who would be the first of this year's Holy Ji Palace battle? Formless wind blew past the battleground, fluttering their robes. Mu Jiqiu's indifferent eyes stared at the battleground and showed some rare emotions. She gazed at the most handsome one of the 3 and asked herself, is he able to defeat Bai Zai and Huang Zhouge? Qin Yin, Xiaowuji, and the others from Mount Zhoushan were all a bit nervous. They watched with bated breath. Gu Yunxi, Long Mu, and the others inhaled sharply. Futian had once swept through Divine Sky City domineeringly. Would he be able to create a miracle at the foot of the Holy Ji Palace today? On the silent battlefield, Bai Zai looked so handsome. He looked at Futian and suddenly chuckled. "You think that you can show off your pride by copying Huang Zhouge and I and not challenging voluntarily?" Bai Zai mocked. "Pride needs abilities as a foundation. A clown like you can only make a fool out of yourself. You didn't fight in the top 10 battles. Why am I making a fool out of myself by standing here?" Futian asked Bai Zai. "Because some people don't need to fight. They only need to stand there and people will recognize them. Yet others will only be seen as a challenger, even if he fought his way here, no matter if he voluntarily challenged or not." Bai Zai stared at Futian. "Do you understand?" Futian's eyes flashed. Then he nodded. "You're right. Bai Zai's words were indeed correct. But there's something you don't understand yet," Futian continued. "Really?" Bai Zai smiled thinly. "You'll see soon," Futian said. Bai Zai laughed. "I'm excited, but first, you'll understand just how far apart we are." The moment he finished, His eyes turned dark gray. Horrible spiritual energy shot out from his gray eyes. The vast space was instantly filled with some terrible dark gray air current. Spiritual qi flowed in reverse and the world turned gray. Those eyes pierced into Yi Futian's mind. At that moment, Yi Futian seemed to see Bai Zhe standing right before him. In his mind, Bai Zhe had turned into a giant. He reached out and his spiritual energy pressed down, about to squash Yi Futian. This was the eye of devastation. Countless eyes fell upon the battlefield. Sensing the chaotic space, they clearly understood that Bai Zhe had already attacked. How could Yi Futian take Bai Zhe's eye of devastation? However, a starry world had appeared in Yi Futian's world. The sun, moon, and stars hung high in the sky. An extremely divine force was guarding it. When the huge handprint descended, it released sacred light that blocked the invasive spiritual energy attack. Bai Zhe's spiritual energy could even attack Shimin Yin directly, so he was obviously very strong. Yi Futian naturally had to protect his mind well. Your defense is actually this strong? It's a bit unexpected, but as long as you're within my territory, how can you fight back? Bai Zhe asked coldly. Impossibly heavy might weigh down on Yi Futian. Afterward, a huge palm appeared in the sky. It grabbed at Yi Futian. The spiritual qi in the world roared. Yi Futian wanted to attack using a spell, but all the spiritual qi seemed to be restricted. It was hard to be gathered into a spell. Yi Futian had to use the power within his body. Not being able to resonate with the spiritual qi in the environment drastically reduced a sorcerer's powers. Trying to use a spell in my eye's territory? Are you dreaming? Bai Zhe mocked. He may have been in the list of perfection, but he hadn't fought in any of the top 10 battles. He'd never showed his true abilities. No one had been enough to make him go full out. Thus, no one knew just how powerful Bai Zhe was until now. Releasing the golden rock life spirit, Yi Futian flashed. He punched powerfully, activating the spiritual qi within him. A golden rock seemed to burst from his fist, landing on the huge handprint. Boom! The handprint shattered and Yi Futian was driven back. He looked up in the sky. The more clearly he saw it, the more he could feel the pressure within this space. So powerful. Countless hearts quivered. Even though Yi Futian had displayed shocking combat ability earlier, he probably would still lose against Bai Zhe. The second young lord of the White Cloud City had only released one power to make everyone feel despair. Huang Zhuge stood to the side. He didn't rush to attack. Instead, he just watched Bai Zhe and Yi Futian's fight. A pure sorcerer would lose pathetically against Bai Zhe. Thud! Yi Futian stepped out. His golden wings glimmered and he shot forward in the air, going straight for Bai Zhe. Even if he didn't use spells, his physical body was still extremely powerful. Want a close-distance fight? Bai Zhe looked at him mockingly. He waved a half and instantly gathered spiritual qi to cast a spell. Endless thunder chains flew towards Yi Futian, blocking his incoming path. The golden rock cut a beautiful arc in the sky. The spiritual qi inside it lay on its wings. Yi Futian flew forward like a divine bird. He shot through the spells, going straight for Bai Zhe. Humph! Bai Zhe huffed coldly. Dazzling gold light flashed before him, transforming into a huge golden image. It glistened before him. All metal elemental spiritual qi gathered wildly before him. The golden image dazzled, cutting the air apart. Boom! Yi Futian's fist landed squarely on the image. Cracked but didn't shatter. It continued to shine blindingly. Spiritual qi fell down, mending the cracks. Bai Zhe of the White Cloud City didn't only have the eye of devastation. Bai Luli was known as the strongest genius of the Barren State. He was in the top 10 of the Barren Sky ranking and was skilled in many abilities. Like his brother, Bai Zhe must have learned a lot too. Yi Futian produced a golden staff. His rock-like body passed through the sky and horrible power gathered towards it. Once again he shot towards the curtain of gold light like lightning. He brought down his golden staff. With a crisp sound, the gold light curtain broke. In front of Yi Futian, endless spiritual qi dropped down around Bai Zhe at that moment. It felt like some law descended into the image floating before Bai Zhe. The long image was like an inscription. It devoured the spiritual qi in the world and gradually formed a special image. Shocking power emanated from it. Air inscription. Yi Futian's heart trembled. He'd once used this power before. but he couldn't carve so many inscriptions like Bai Zai and use it in battle. This required absolute control over the spiritual qi in the surroundings. Now do you know why I want your woman? Bai Zai sent the message to Yi Futian telepathically. A divine spiritual sorcerer could help greatly with his cultivation. Chapter 577. Bai Zai sneered at Yi Futian. The White Cloud City's inscribing was the most elite in the barren state. They even had a complete inscribing manual. Moreover, the overwhelming spiritual control provided by the Eye of Devastation and another unique life spirit made air inscribing possible. Only the most elite spirit elementalists could inscribe spell scrolls in the air during battle, and he was one of them. Divine spiritual sorcerers were also likely to be able to do it. If Hua Jieyu was to become his path companion, they could improve their cultivation together. Bai Zai sneered at Yi Futian. The White Cloud City's inscribing was the most elite in the barren state. They even had a complete inscribing manual. Moreover, the overwhelming spiritual control provided by the Eye of Devastation and another unique life spirit made air inscribing possible. Only the most elite spirit elementalists could inscribe spell scrolls in the air during battle, and he was one of them. Divine spiritual sorcerers were also likely to be able to do it. If Hua Jieyu was to become his path companion, they could improve their cultivation together. The acclaimed ultimate sorcerers could form a spell in an instant. If it was cultivated together with the White Cloud City's inscribing, he would definitely reach a high level of attainment. It was a pity that Hua Jieyu was not understanding and chose to submerge herself in her relationship. Spell scrolls started to form, and as Bai Zai's hand waved, rows of spell scrolls flew forward, surrounding Yi Futian. Chains of the Thunder God. As Bai Zai's voice sounded, the spell scrolls around Yi Futian exploded with power. In an instant, thunder flooded the entire area and hundreds of thousands of lightning chains shot out from the spell scrolls, drowning Yi Futian within. The spell Chains of the Thunder God was the spell inscribed in the spell scrolls. Countless spell scrolls activating at the same time. Imagine the horrifying power released. In an instant, Yi Futian was locked down by countless lightning chains in the air, his limbs electrocuted by terrifying lightning. The lightning traveled along his brilliant golden body, and the other end of the chains were controlled by Bai Zai. How horrifying, someone in the crowd said as they were all stunned, their attention fixed on the battlefield. At his strongest, Bai Zai was too strong. Just one of his spells was already this strong, not to mention multiple spell scrolls being activated at the same time. There was no counter for the spell. Countless lightning bolts flowed along Yi Futian's body, causing him to shudder uncontrollably, probably because he was already unable to move. Bai Zai's gaze swept across Yi Futian. Now it was time for him to feel what it was like to fall from grace under the gazes of tens of thousands of people. Among the countless thunder god chains, an abrupt lightning bolt flew towards Yi Futian's body. However, at that moment in Yi Futian's life palace, rustling sounds could be heard as his life spirit, the world tree, swayed and let out a brilliant glow. Yi Futian's body seemingly transformed into an ancient tree at that moment, his meridians and bones becoming a part of the tree, and a tree's shadow could be seen within his body. Countless spiritual qi could be seen flowing towards the world tree in his life palace, which was attempting to devour all the spiritual qi. Not only that, but the thunder chains that had locked onto Yi Futian and circulating around his body were actually converting to spiritual qi and being absorbed by his body, flowing rapidly towards the tree in his life palace. At that moment, the lightning on Yi Futian's body became even more brilliant. Even though he was chained down by the thunder spell, more lightning flew towards him and was still unable to destroy his body. All the while he stood there quietly, allowing the chains to lock his body down. His body is absorbing the thunder. The spiritual qi within the spell is actually being absorbed by his body. Many influential figures noticed what was happening and let out surprised yells, their expressions stunned. Yi Futian's body was unbelievably hungry, greedily devouring all the spiritual qi it could. The world tree could support the lives of all living beings. As the spirit of all things, it was also the origin of all spells. Back then, Yi Futian used the ability of the world tree to form his life spirit with the tree as a foundation, and gradually developed the potential to use all elements. In the process, the world tree gained the ability to metamorphose to other elements. Yi Futian had deciphered the wood elemental spiritual will. It was all-encompassing and had strong life power. As long as the world tree was not destroyed, his spiritual qi would not fade away. At that moment, Yi Futian raised his head and looked at Bai Zai, lightning sparking in his eyes. There was no trace of him being struck by a spell at all. His expression extremely cold, killing intent buried deep inside his eyes. "Is this all you have?" Yi Futian asked. At that moment, the air around him was filled with spiritual qi and wisps of an overbearing spiritual will was being released, as though divine light had descended upon the battlefield. In the air, a starry dimension formed with Yi Futian at its core. The sun and moon hung high in the sky and the divine light illuminated the entire battlefield, causing the area to allow both the starry dimension and the eye-sorcery dimension to coexist. It couldn't suppress him? Bai Zai raised his head and looked at the starry dimension. His eye-sorcery was actually unable to suppress Yi Futian's spiritual will, and his spell did not crush Yi Futian as well. What a shock! Interesting. Bai Zai smiled. He had initially thought that it would be a one-sided battle, but it turned out that Yi Futian was capable of retaliating. That made it all the more interesting. Bai Zai stretched out his arms and brilliant spell scrolls appeared in the air, a golden glow trickling into them, sending the spell scrolls flying towards Yi Futian. Yi Futian used his freedom meditation, allowing him to see everything that Bai Zai was doing clearly. Soon the completed spell scrolls became circles, surrounding the area below Yi Futian. A piercing golden glow radiated and sparkling lights were emitted from the golden spell scrolls. The sparkling lights appeared to cut through the golden threads, creating a formless web, cutting through the air and tearing through everything. When the crowd saw the piercing light, even Hua Jieyu was worried for Yi Futian. The spell was definitely a lethal attacking spell that was able to cut through even air. Multiple spell scrolls activating at the same time created a destructive golden web that could tear through everything. Bang! Around Yi Futian, a meteorite barrier appeared in an instant. However, when the golden rays came into contact with it, they cut through the meteorites like tiny wires. The countless rays intersected and the meteorites were sliced to particles in an instant. They were cut into countless bits while the horrifying spell continued towards Yi Futian's body. If it came into contact with his flesh, it could probably tear him to shreds. In his life palace, the rustling sounds continued and an innumerable amount of spiritual qi circulated towards the world tree. Following that, they flowed towards Yi Futian's body. At that moment, the spiritual qi in the sky resonated with Yi Futian, and all the spiritual qi in the area turned into a celestial force. A starry storm that had been compressed to its limits started to revolve around Yi Futian, a clear starry brilliance shining in it. His body turned into immortal celestial bodies. When the spell scroll's attacks landed, countless tiny wires sliced towards him, cutting through the immortal celestial bodies bit by bit. Soon the defensive celestial bodies were riddled with cuts and the golden web pounced forward, tearing through the immortal celestial bodies, causing them to revert back to celestial force and dissipate. However, the horrifying golden glow also dimmed, and it already had no destructive force when it landed on Yi Futian's body. He stopped it, the crowd thought as they looked at Yi Futian in astonishment. Yi Futian had actually stopped such a strong destructive attack. Bai Zai frowned. The spell he had cast was an extremely strong killer move of his, but even that was not enough to kill Yi Futian. It seemed that Yi Futian's strength was much higher than he had expected. "Is this all you have?" Yi Futian's gaze landed on Bai Zai and he asked coldly. As his voice landed, his palm grasped the air and celestial force flew towards Bai Zai, turning into countless meteorites and crashing down upon him, attempting to bury Bai Zai within. That was the starry spell, Star Burial. Nobody can use spells in your eye-sorcery zone? Then what is this? Yi Futian said emotionlessly. Bai Zai raised his head and looked at the approaching spell. In an instant, his pupils became exceedingly scary and a life spirit appeared behind him. It was a pair of eyes that was exceptionally demonic. The life spirit assimilated into Bai Zai's eyes and his pupils swept across the area, causing many meteorites to shatter and others to deviate from their course, missing him and crashing into the ground. None of the meteorites were able to threaten him. Even if Yi Futian was able to cast spells, it was wishful thinking that any spell could even hit him. "Do you know why I didn't challenge you before this?" Yi Futian looked towards Bai Zai and asked. Swishing sounds could be heard as golden vines engulfed the area. The vines appeared to be connected with his body and blocked out the sun's rays in an instant. Bai Zai's eye of devastation swept forward, attempting to interrupt the spell. However, the fatal vines appeared to have no end, continuing to sweep forward. Even if their course were changed by the eye of devastation, they continued to change directions and assault him. This time the fatal entanglement was cast by Futian, making use of his life spirit, the World Tree. It included spiritual qi of other elements within, and converted them to metal, and would elemental spiritual qi. However haughty you were before this is how lowly you will be after you have been defeated. As Futian finished speaking, the fatal vines rushed forward rapidly. Bai Zai's expression was extremely grim and a giant spell scroll appeared behind him, a brilliant glow emitting from it. Bai Zai waved his arm and multiple spell scrolls were created in an instant, floating in front of his body. Immediately, they turned into a golden veil with countless runes circulating within it. The metal elemental spiritual qi in the air rushed into the veil, turning into an indestructible barrier. Bai Zai raised his head and looked at Futian. What a crazy fellow, wanting to humiliate him in the battlefield. The fatal entanglement turned into sharp blades and slashed towards the golden veil in the air. Surprisingly, it did not destroy it and only managed to cause tiny cracks in the veil. Behind the veil, Bai Zai waved both arms and created more spell scrolls, which were floating in the air. Through the veil, he fired them at Futian with acute killing intent. Futian similarly looked at Bai Zai. The both of them stared daggers at each other with ruthless expressions. At that moment, a brilliant glow appeared behind Futian and scrolls appeared, inscribed by spiritual energy. Materialization of spiritual energy. Bai Zai looked at Futian and immediately understood what he was doing. He was also a spirit elemental mandate sorcerer who excelled in spiritual energy. What was he trying to do by crafting scrolls with his spiritual energy? Could it be? When he thought of the possibility, Bai Zai's face turned pale. It was impossible. Is air inscribing that great? Futian asked slowly. As his voice landed, an enormous amount of spiritual energy rushed into his scrolls. At that moment, Futian utilized his spiritual energy to the limit and controlled the flow of spiritual qi. The scrolls floating in the air emitted a blinding purple glow, like they were being imbued into spell scrolls. The crowd saw this and was dumbfounded. Futian also knew the art of air inscribing. To a noble plane cultivator, it would not be hard to learn inscribing if they wanted to. However, to inscribe spell scrolls in the air while battling was insanely difficult. They had to have strong control over their spiritual energy and no inscribing to begin with. For the White Cloud City's second young master Bai Zai, one of his life spirits was a spell scroll, coupled with his high attainment in spirit elemental control. Only then could he inscribe spell scrolls in the air. When did Futian learn how to do this, and why did he not use it in any of his previous battles? Chapter 578. The crowd did not know that although Futian had cultivated in inscribing, he had not actually practiced air inscribing. Previously, he had used his freedom meditation to observe Bai Zai's air inscribing, and saw Bai Zai using his spiritual energy to create inscribing paper, and guiding the spell into it. When he cast the spell, he could directly use his spiritual energy to control it and use it in battle. The crowd did not know that although Futian had cultivated in inscribing, he had not actually practiced air inscribing. Previously, he had used his freedom meditation to observe Bai Zai's air inscribing, and saw Bai Zai using his spiritual energy to create inscribing paper, and guiding the spell into it. When he cast the spell, he could directly use his spiritual energy to control it and use it in battle. Although air inscribing seemed easy, in reality, it required a delicate control over one's spiritual energy. Futian could only inscribe spells that he could cast in a short period of time. He had done that in previous battles as well, so he was confident that he could emulate Bai Zai's methods. Around Futian, the spiritual qi in the air accumulated and entered the spell scroll, causing a brilliant glow to emit from it. A dangerous might wafted from the spell scrolls as they were being created. The fatal entanglement continued to attack the golden protective veil and cracks appeared in the veil. Finally, the veil was shattered and the fatal entanglement rushed forward to attack Bai Zai. Bai Zai's body floated in the air, his expression extremely ruthless. He exerted the strength of the Eye of Devastation to its limit and hindered the movement of the vines. At the same time, the spell scrolls in his hand danced around him rapidly, turning into flames that covered the entire area and ignited the countless vines. Fire directly countered wood. The vines burned in the flames, but they were not destroyed and continued to move forward in the fire. Be destroyed. Bai Zai waved his hand once again and his spell scrolls turned into a humongous golden web, acting as a wall in front of him that moved forward, slicing everything in its path. The fatal entanglement spell was continually crushed, but the web's strength was also diminished as well. At that moment, Futian brandished his arm and countless spell scrolls flew towards the golden web. Purple thunderbolts appeared in the air and turned into serpents, flying towards the web. It was the spell punishment of the thunder god. The brilliant thunderbolts cut through the air and slid through the openings in the web, snarling towards Bai Zai's body. Around Bai Zai, a radiant protective veil appeared and the punishment of the thunder god crushed it as it landed on the veil, continuing towards his body. At that moment, Bai Zai's hair was dancing wildly and his eyes became exceptionally demonic. An illusion of a pair of giant demon eyes appeared behind him and the punishment of the thunder god either flashed by his side or was decimated, but none of the thunderbolts were able to reach his body. In the air, a phantom descended with rock wings, like a beam of light dashing towards him. A gleam appeared in Bai Zai's eyes. Was he going to try close-range combat after the spell war? The dazzling figure struck out at him with a rod. The 9 heavenly attacks might crushing down. Many people were dumbstruck that Futian had actually made it close to Bai Zai. If the attack hit Bai Zai, what would the outcome be? An intense light burst forth and a spell scroll life spirit appeared behind Bai Zai. An innumerable amount of spiritual qi gathered around him, and he pointed towards his life spirit with both hands. At that moment his life spirit transformed into a giant spell scroll, its golden glow scattering down upon the land. A huge crush word appeared and attempted to squash Futian. The rod and the falling crush collided and a piercing golden light flooded the skies. The ancient word was eradicated, but Futian was also knocked back by the impact. Only the spell scroll life spirit remained in its luminance. How strong, thought the audience as their hearts pounded. Was this what a fight between the elite contestants was like? They had all thought it would be the duel between Bai Zai and Huang Jiuge, but they had not expected the battle between Futian and Bai Zai to be this intense as well. The two of them wielded strong abilities. Bai Zai was the second young lord of the White Cloud City, so everyone knew that he was strong, but they did not think that Futian would be equally overbearing. The Eye of Devastation was unable to counter him, and he knew air inscribing as well. On the martial arts side, his rod skills were able to tear through the air and force Bai Zai into using his twin life spirits to make Futian retreat. At that moment in the battlefield, Bai Zai stared coldly at Futian. He had not expected that he would be forced to such a state by Futian. He was the second young master of the White Cloud City and he only respected one person apart from his elders, his brother Bai Luli. Apart from him, he had never treated anyone in the barren state as his equal. They all had to look up to him. He would become like his brother, a figure respected by everyone. Now, in the battle to enter the Holy Ji Palace, how could he be defeated? Especially to Futian, whose cultivation level was even lower than him. Definitely not. Futian floated in the air, his now golden eyes observing Bai Zai. If you looked carefully, you could see killing intent in them. He knew that this second young lord of the White Cloud City had never treated him as an opponent. Otherwise, why else would he express his admiration for Jieyu in public and ignore him? Moreover, in the battlefield, he transmitted a message and insulted Futian. If it wasn't out of consideration for his image, he might have said it out directly. In the eyes of the presumptuous young city lord, Futian was but a mere ant that he could humiliate, trample and even destroy. Since that was so, today would be a day he would remember forever. In his life palace, the rustling sounds continued as spiritual qi of all attributes appeared to be resonating with him. Futian could feel that if he released his world tree life spirit, the spiritual qi in the air would all rush towards him. However, his did not do so. He had already revealed too much with his other life spirits. It was better to keep his natal spirit hidden. Even so, in the starry dimension, a myriad of spiritual qi continued to pound downwards. Star Pillar. Yi Futian said emotionlessly. As his voice landed, starry stone plates fell from the heavens, and with multiple crashes, the stone plates transformed into stone pillars, sealing off the entire area and Bai Zai's escape route. The people who saw this were all stunned. What was Yi Futian trying to do? By sealing off Bai Zai's escape route, he was also trapping himself within. Was he this confident that he could defeat Bai Zai? Bai Zai felt humiliated, and the giant spell scroll life spirit in front of him looked like a brilliant slate. He made mudras with his hands and his fingers pointed towards the spell scroll. In an instant, the spiritual chi within his body flowed rapidly towards the spell scroll, and countless purple thunderbolts turned into serpents and descended upon his life spirit. In that instant, there appeared to be countless bolts of thunder coiling around the spell scroll, making it look like a holy talisman with a horrific destructive aura emanating from it. Bai Zai's body was completely drowned in the thunder and appeared transparent. His surroundings had transformed into a thunderbolt dimension. The thunderbolt struck the starry pillars, causing cracks to appear in the pillars. One could imagine the might of the spell. Yi Futian naturally knew the power of the spell scroll. It could cast spells that were beyond one's ability. Moreover, Bai Zai had the spell scroll life spirit, and could use it to craft spells directly, so he could definitely create an immense destructive spell. He could see that Bai Zai was preparing his final strike. In his life palace, the world tree devoured all the spiritual chi and turned into the shade of the stars. Yi Futian's life palace transformed into a real starry dimension, and its power flowed into Yi Futian's body. Immediately, Yi Futian's skin started to emit a brilliant starry glow, and spiritual chi of all elements started to move towards his body, turning into the light of the stars, circulating around his body. His body was like a star. If it was pushed to the limit, it would be inextinguishable. On top of that, a starry polearm appeared in Yi Futian's hands, and as his wings opened, he started to fly in the air. A horrifying might descended, and in the starry dimension, Yi Futian's speed started to increase, and it was almost impossible to catch a glimpse of his body. All that could be seen were after images. Purple thunder shot out from Bai Zai's demonic eyes, and his spiritual energy locked onto Yi Futian's body. Trying to avoid his strongest spell by raising his speed to the limit? Not so fast. It's too brilliant. As more cracks appeared on the starry pillars, the crowd could feel what was happening on the battlefield through the cracks, and they saw the divine bird, the rock, pushing its speed to the limit and darting through the air with a terrifying might surrounding its body, while destructive force appeared in front of Bai Zai, attempting to destroy everything. Huang Jioga stood below the battlefield, watching the battle unfold. He was astounded as well. He had not thought that the battle between Bai Zai and Yi Futian would reach such an overwhelming extent. Fire burned in his eyes as he acknowledged both of them as worthy opponents. What a pity that the two of them were battling. He was in no position to interfere. Almighty Thunder Guide, kill, Bai Zai said cruelly. As his voice landed, a bolt of thunder struck Yi Futian, who was darting through the air. That bolt of thunder acted as a guide, and in the next moment, Yi Futian felt a truly destructive force as the countless thunderbolts on the spell scroll locked onto him, and flew towards him like the roar of the thunder god. At that moment, Yi Futian did not dodge and rushed towards Bai Zai with no hesitation. His speed appeared to break through the limit and was becoming even faster, even to the point where it surpassed the lock-on by Bai Zai's spiritual energy. At that moment, Yi Futian darted within the thunderbolts, his extreme speed allowing his body to nullify the targeting. Many of the attacks missed his body and struck behind him, but there were still numerous thunderbolts that struck him directly. However, Yi Futian's defense was unyielding, but it continued to be torn apart as cracks appeared in the inextinguishable starry defense, and the light of destruction appeared on his body. However, Yi Futian did not stop and instead dived past the thunderbolts. The inextinguishable starry defense was finally shattered and imposing thunderbolts struck Yi Futian's body. But he still appeared in front of Bai Zai as Bai Zai watched him get closer in horror. This isn't possible. Bai Zai saw the descending figure and roared, casting defensive spells on his body. Faster than lightning, a polearm swung down from the air towards him. Bang! With a dull sound, Bai Zai's defenses were crushed in just one strike, and Bai Zai's body curled up, blood streaming from his mouth as he fell rapidly to the ground. At the same time, Yi Futian started to descend rapidly as well. Bang! Another dull sound as Futian's foot stepped down on Bai Zai's body, crushing him beneath his feet. Another stream of blood appeared around Bai Zai's mouth, and he stared menacingly at Futian. He had been trampled by Futian and humiliated. Bam! The two of them landed, and the sound of breaking bones could be heard as countless people held their breaths and watched the scene in amazement. Futian had trampled Bai Zai and smashed him into the ground. Chapter 579. Bai Zai had been defeated. Bai Zai had been defeated. The second young master of the White Cloud City, who had outstanding potential, exceedingly strong twin life spirits, and the eye of devastation that could counter all spells and attack others' spiritual will directly. He could inscribe spell scrolls in the air and excelled in spells of all elements. Even if he was slightly weaker in the martial arts, he was still confident that nobody could get near him. How strong would he be when he used spells of all elements to create spell scrolls? How scary was the eye of devastation? Everyone had thought that his opponent would be Huang Jioga. But seeing Futian step on Bai Zai's body now, the vast area became abnormally quiet. Even the influential figures from the Holy Ji Palace looked at the scene awestruck. A furious roar sounded out as Bai Zai's eyes were red with anger, and he stared menacingly at Futian. He was the second young master of the White Cloud City. Since he had been born, he had been a genius. Just like Futian had thought, he looked down upon Futian, even if had some potential, even if he was very strong. Bai Zai had not treated him as a peer. That was why he expressed his affection for Hua Jieyu in public. There were not many people in the barren state that mattered to him. In the top 10 ranking battle, you have no victories. Now, do you understand why you could enter the top 3? Futian looked at Bai Zai and said coldly, "That's because I bestowed it upon you. Otherwise, do you think you could have stayed until now?" Bai Zai's veins were popping as blood rushed to his eyes, and he looked frightening. His position in the top 3 had been bestowed upon him by Futian? What humiliation! However, everyone understood that it was the truth, because Futian had been the victor in this battle. If Futian had challenged him previously, he would have been eliminated a long time ago. Presumptuous, arrogant, haughty. Now, do you enjoy it? Futian looked at Bai Zai and said cruelly. He wanted Bai Zai to engrave this battle into his memory, and remember it forever. He wanted it to become his nightmare. He had intentionally let Bai Zai into the top 3. Seeing his arrogance, he wanted to make him learn some respect. Futian transmitted a message to Bai Zai saying, "From now on, when people see you, they will think about how you, the second young master of the White Cloud City, was trampled under my feet. You will never be able to erase today's humiliation." Saying that he wanted Futian's woman to his face? The cheek of him. "Open your mouth and concede." Futian's foot stomped down and he said mercilessly, his eyes full of disdain. When the arrogant Bai Zai conceded, it would be a memory that would last a lifetime. "You've already won, that's enough." At that moment, in the direction of the Holy Ji Palace, an elder said, "Let's end it here." Bai Luli chipped in as well. It looked like Futian was intentionally taking revenge on Bai Zai for his invitation to Hua Jieyu. This battle would be an unforgettable memory for Bai Zai. He knew that life had been too smooth for his younger brother for the past 20 years. He had never suffered any setback, causing him to become reckless and haughty. Today would be a harsh lesson for him. According to the rules, as long as he has not conceded, the battle cannot be considered over. Futian did not let go of Bai Zai and continued stepping on his body. This caused many people to be bewildered. They did not understand why Futian wanted to humiliate Bai Zai that much. If they had known what Bai Zai had transmitted to Futian during the battle, they would not find it strange. If possible, Futian even wanted to kill Bai Zai. However, with the White Cloud City Lord and Bai Luli's status, if he killed Bai Zai, he would definitely die as well. Even if the rules allowed it, those who set the rules could break them at any time. "Die!" A livid voice sounded out, and he saw Bai Zai holding a spell scroll in his hand, which he threw at Futian. In an instant, a tremendous force appeared and Futian immediately flew into the air and retreated like a flash of lightning. However, a colossal thunder god shadow appeared in the skies, striking out with his hammer. The giant hammer shadowed the entire area and smashed towards Futian. Bang! Although Futian was surrounded by a protective force, The hammer tore through his defenses. A huge starry polearm appeared in front of Yi Futian. It was the polearm of divine destruction, shielding his body. Even so, the polearm of divine destruction was knocked back and hit Yi Futian. The thunder's might ran through him, causing his body to fly into the air and spew out blood. The crowd's gaze froze. Bai Zai actually relied on external assistance. Many experts from the Holy Ji Palace also frowned. The elder on the sky stairwell berated him, saying, "Bai Zai, you've already been defeated. Step down." Bai Zai got up from the ground, his body stooping and his aura weak. He was in agony and stared intently at the figure in the sky with killing intent. Zoom! A figure rushed down from the sky. It was Yi Futian, who had transformed into a flash of lightning. Bai Zai waved his arm and numerous spell scrolls appeared in his hands. He sent them flying towards Yi Futian, who was in the air. In an instant, a destructive force flooded the area, threatening to eradicate everything. At the same time, Bai Zai was shielded by a dazzling golden veil to protect himself from Yi Futian's onslaught. While flying down, Yi Futian swung his polearm of divine destruction as starlight emanated from it. Huge amounts of starry force were imbued in the polearm of divine destruction as it cleaved downwards from the air. The polearm of divine destruction tore through the destructive force and landed on the veil surrounding Bai Zai's body. With a crack, the veil shattered and Bai Zai's body was sent flying again while he spewed blood. Many people looked speechlessly at the two of them. Had the fight gotten personal? Bai Zai appeared to have become frenzied and ignored the rules. Yi Futian was the same. He had used his ritual implement in the fight. "Yi Futian, he's already severely injured. You can stop now," Bai Luli said. He looked at Bai Zai, evidently displeased. It looked like his younger brother was unable to withstand the humiliation and forgotten where he was. "He hasn't conceded, it hasn't ended." Yi Futian continued to dash forward, raising the polearm of divine destruction, attempting to attack him. "They've both gone insane," thought the crowd as they looked on dumbfounded. Had the two of them gone on a rampage? They saw Yi Futian swing his polearm down yet again. Bai Luli stood up and many of the Holy Ji Palace's influential figures frowned. "That's enough." A loud roar sounded out and reverberated through the air. Yi Futian had fought his way into the final battle for the Holy Ji Palace's admissions with his unrivaled potential. Behind them, Li Qingyi had tears in her eyes. She came from the White Sovereign City and had never thought of entering the Holy Ji Palace. She only wanted to see the geniuses from the barren state, those who would be revered by the world. After a huge accident, she had come to the foot of the Holy Ji Palace and seen what she had wanted to. However, the person who had received the most attention was the teenager that had accompanied her all the way here. He was standing up there. Chapter 580. Yi Futian stared at Huang Zhouge with caution in his eyes. Since the sovereign family dared to call themselves the descendants of Ren Huang, they were naturally an extraordinary clan. Just look at the techniques Huang Zhouge cultivated and they were of superior quality. Yi Futian stared at Huang Zhouge with caution in his eyes. Since the sovereign family dared to call themselves the descendants of Ren Huang, they were naturally an extraordinary clan. Just look at the techniques Huang Zhouge cultivated and they were of superior quality. Yi Shaoshi and Yuan Zhan had both been defeated by Huang Zhouge. The sun and moon starlight continued to shine and there were flame and frost wills oozing from the sun and moon, flying towards Huang Zhouge. The two forces engulfed him but Huang Zhouge did not move. He stood there quietly, releasing his martial arts will. A wave of sovereign spiritual qi enveloped his body, allowing the flame and frost to invade. He had 3 life spirits and was a rare mandate sorcerer. On top of that, he was gifted in spiritual energy control, but he did not cultivate mainly in spells but the martial arts. The secret methods that had been passed down in the sovereign family were mostly in the martial arts. The crowd saw a brilliant ray of light as behind Huang Zhouge, his Run Huang Bao life spirit appeared. He was very clear of Yi Futian's battle style. He excelled in multiple abilities and among those, speed was one of Yi Futian's fortes. If Yi Futian combined speed with his spells, he would be in a very passive situation. That was why he had to destroy that notion for Yi Futian. When he put an arrow on the bow, Yi Futian could distinctly feel that he had already been locked on by an invisible spiritual will. The bow in Huang Zhouge's hands let out a blinding glow and the arrow emitted a sharp aura. As Huang Zhouge let go of the bowstring, a ray of light flew across the air, causing a trail to appear as a piercing explosion sounded. In the next moment, the arrow landed in front of Yi Futian with a killing aura and struck Yi Futian's undying constellation. With a crisp thud, cracks appeared in the constellation. Although it did not break through Yi Futian's defenses, the horrifying strength still stunned Yi Futian. Huang Zhouge pulled the bow open again, and this time, 9 arrows shot through the air at the same time, and many people were blinded momentarily by the arrows. The glaring light pierced through the air and flew towards Yi Futian yet again. Around Yi Futian, the starry storm continued to brew. When the arrows landed, the storm crumbled to dust and turned into a tremendous vortex. His golden rock wings spread open and Yi Futian retreated. As the thud sounds continued, more cracks appeared in the constellation and it eventually broke. The force in the arrows continued to fire towards him and Yi Futian slammed his fist forward vigorously. However, the golden palm was pierced by the arrows, but the arrows had been weakened to the point that they could not hurt him. What strong arrows, Yi Futian thought. He had already retreated to the edge of the battlefield. If Huang Zhouge's opponent had been some other average cultivator at the same cultivation level as him, he would probably have already been defeated in the air the moment the Renhuang bow had been fired. At that moment, Huang Zhouge pulled his bow open once again. This time 12 arrows filled with destructive force locked onto Yi Futian. Huang Zhouge's body was also like his bow, and the air was rampaging as the 12 arrows flew like meteors towards the starry dimension where Yi Futian was. Around Yi Futian, a starry storm picked up and rustling sounds sounded from his body. His body resonated with the heavens and a huge amount of spiritual qi turned into a starry vortex. The arriving arrows pierced through the vortex, tearing it to shreds. The starry meteorites in front of Yi Futian were rapidly destroyed, but were unable to prevent the arrow's offense. At that moment Yi Futian moved like a divine bird, soaring across the air, weaving through the arrow rain and approaching Huang Zhouge. Although he specialized in spells, if the battle continued the same way, he would be the one being trapped. The speed of the arrows was too fast. It was as though they could warp across the distance between them. Yi Futian waved his arm and spell scrolls appeared in the air. A numerous amount of spiritual qi gathered and spiritual qi flowed rapidly from within his body into the spell scrolls, causing an alarming aura to seep from the spell scrolls, thunder firing from them. The punishment of the thunder god. Yi Futian waved his arm forward and the numerous spell scrolls flew towards Huang Zhouge. In an instant the skies filled with purple lightning, attempting to drown out the entire area, all flying towards Huang Zhouge. The Renhuang Bao life spirit vanished, replaced by the Renhuang body. Immediately, Huang Zhouge's aura became extremely scary, as though the Renhuang had descended into the world. An astonishing martial arts will erupted from his body, causing an illusion to appear in the skies. The sovereign spiritual qi turned into an army with majestic figures on battle chariots, rushing towards Yi Futian. The area had turned into an actual battlefield. Animation of martial arts will. This is the martial arts truth. What an overbearing technique, thought the crowd as they stared at the scene in front of Huang Zhouge, overwhelmed by it. The majestic figures held spears in their hand as they broke through everything, unfazed by death as they split the thunderbolts apart. Although they were continuously destroyed, they managed to block the wave of thunderbolts. Yi Futian continued to shine with the spiritual qi's glow and the rustling sounds continued in his life palace, the world tree shaking endlessly, and the spiritual qi circulating rapidly. Around Yi Futian's body countless golden vines appeared, covering the skies, then they flew like blades, tearing through the air towards Huang Zhouge, who was standing below. The Renhuang sword descended and Huang Zhouge held his life spirit, the Renhuang sword in his hands. The Renhuang body released a sovereign aura and Huang Zhouge's body appeared to become extremely majestic. The Renhuang sword in his hand struck out and flew in a straight arc into the air, causing a terrifying storm to appear, cutting all the vines to pieces. Huang Zhouge stepped forward, moving together with the Renhuang sword. The sovereign aura circulated around his body, as though the Renhuang had descended into the world. He looked into the air and swung the Renhuang sword yet again. Immediately, the giant sword tore through everything and aimed towards Yi Futian in its brilliance. Seeing Huang Zhuge approaching, the giant rock wings flapped and Yi Futian flew towards the clouds. The crowd raised their heads and saw Yi Futian flying in a graceful arc. He stretched out his arm in the air and spiritual qi started to flock around him, a starry polearm forming in his hand. Following that, the divine rock dived downwards. In the starry dimension, an immense force crushed downwards and landed on the Renhuang sword and Huang Zhuge. A horrifying rod shadow appeared in the air and with a huge crash, the Renhuang sword was knocked backward and Huang Zhuge grabbed it with both hands, but his body continued to fall backward uncontrollably. What a strong attack! Huang Zhuge's expression was sharp. Yi Futian's attack was extremely similar to Yuan Zhan's and appeared to be the same rod technique. The technique was more compatible with Yuan Zhan, but had stronger force when used by Yi Futian. Evidently, Yi Futian had a greater understanding of the technique. Raising his head, the winds billowed in the skies and the figure descended once again. Without much time to think, an even stronger aura burst forth from Huang Zhuge, the Renhuang sword howling as it pointed into the air. The martial arts illusion appeared yet again. Figures on battle chariots in an ancient battlefield gave people the feeling that the person wielding the Renhuang sword had a huge army at his disposal, attacking where the sword pointed at. A terrifying aura swept the air and clashed with Yi Futian's 9 heavenly attacks. An even scarier crash sounded out and it was like an explosion in the air. The battle chariots were smashed and the lances were broken. The Renhuang sword was jolted back yet again while Yi Futian flew up into the air again, preparing his next attack. How strong! The entire battlefield was shaking and countless people thought that as they watched the two of them battle. Was this a clash between the strongest martial arts techniques? In the skies, Yi Futian wielded his polearm and countless spiritual qi gathered around his body, empowering his technique. Seeing the scene, Huang Zhuge frowned and took out his Renhuang bow again. 12 arrows fired into the air, trying to stop Yi Futian from gathering more power. He could naturally feel that Yi Futian was getting stronger as the fight progressed by his increasing aura. The starry storm spell surrounding his body, Yi Futian's body dived down from the skies. When the starry storm was torn apart by the arrows, the polearm shadows around him swept the arrows away. The third strike of the 9 heavenly attacks struck out and after this strike, even Huang Zhuge was knocked to the ground. As he landed on the battlefield, the ground trembled. Yi Futian continued with his fourth strike and the polearm shadow descended from the heavens directly onto the figure on the ground. When Huang Zhuge saw the oncoming attack, he pierced his Renhuang sword into the ground and a frantic wave swept past. Behind him, his Renhuang body appeared to be transforming and assimilated into his body. A destructive storm rushed forward and countless imposing figures appeared around him, raising their heads towards the air. The surrounding area had a terrifying veil, like a summoning circle. When the polearm shadow landed on the veil, it shattered the veil, causing the imposing figures and battle chariots to all explode into dust and fade away. However, the strike had been blocked and Yi Futian felt a sense of danger, like there was a divine strength being awakened. Being able to force me to this point, Yi Futian, you are really strong, Huang Zhuge said. On his body, countless rays of light circulated around him, as though the sovereign spiritual qi was flowing towards the Renhuang body and Renhuang sword. The sword howled in the ground and the Renhuang body was growing. Next, an unparalleled figure appeared as though it had been summoned by the Renhuang. The Renhuang sword similarly grew in size and the summoned figure grabbed the Renhuang sword with both hands and an alarming storm formed, threatening to tear everything apart. Yi Futian did not hesitate and struck out with the fifth strike of the 9 heavenly attacks. With the force that could split the heavens, the strike landed and polearm shadows covered the entire battlefield. However, at that moment, the summoned Renhuang body figure pulled the sword from the ground and swung it into the air. A formidable beam appeared and the polearm shadows vanished. The overbearing power split even the air and Yi Futian's body was sent flying, his body shivering. Huang Zhuge stood below, raising his head and bathing in the Renhuang's glow. He appeared to have merged with the Renhuang body figure and held the Renhuang sword, as though the Renhuang had reincarnated, giving others a sacred feeling. Many people saw the illusion and some even believed that the sovereign family was really the descendants of the Renhuang. You can give up now. Huang Zhuge raised his head and looked into the air. As a grade 9 noble, for Yi Futian to be able to battle with him to this extent was something to be proud of. However, as the descendant of the sovereign family, he had to obtain first in this time's Holy Ji Palace admission to prove himself to the world. This was also the first time he had made an appearance in the barren state. He would create a legacy for the sovereign family from today onwards. Many people compare you with Bai Zhe, but he's not even worthy to battle with you. In the air, Yi Futian replied. At the edge of the battlefield, Bai Zhe looked extremely grim, but the crowd agreed with Yi Futian's words. Yi Futian had battled with the two of them, so he was naturally the most qualified to give his opinion. Moreover, Huang Zhuge's strength was indeed ridiculously strong, especially the Huang Zhuge now, who was literally invincible. If it had turned out as they expected and Huang Zhuge battled with Bai Zhe would most definitely be crushed. However, Yi Futian's existence allowed them to witness Huang Zhuge's true strength and bear witness to a worthy final battle. Even if Yi Futian were to be defeated, he could still be proud of it. Huang Zhuge looked into the air, but saw that at that moment, Yi Futian had closed his eyes and a fearsome aura was roaring around his body. In the starry dimension, an innumerable of starlight gathered around him and formed a giant starry polearm in front of him, causing many people to be astonished. Yi Futian was going to continue battling. At that moment, the crowd saw countless meteorites flying down from Yi Futian's starry dimension onto Huang Zhuge, but they were sliced apart before they reached Huang Zhuge. However, the meteorites appeared to be never-ending. At that moment, Huang Zhuge felt a faint pressure, as though all the meteorites in the air were weighing down on him. It was extremely heavy. At that moment, Yi Futian recalled the Elder Snow Ape's 9 heavenly strikes. The 9 heavenly strikes will resonated with one's cultivation level. The 6th strike resonated with the sage's will. The divine light surrounding his body flowed as the starry force merged into one. A shocking roar sounded out and the crowd saw a divine ape shadow appear on Yi Futian, its hands gripping a colossal starry polearm. The divine ape leaped down from the heavens with the force of the previous 5 strikes, and the force of the starry dimension and struck out with its polearm. The strike was basic and simple with no tricks. However, Huang Zhuge felt threatened by it. The huge Runhuang figure held the sword in both hands, swinging it towards the skies. At that moment, a scary sight appeared in the air. The huge divine ape was fighting against the Runhuang. The starry polearm and the Runhuang sword clashed in the air. In the next moment, an invisible light veil swept across the area and turned into a frightening storm. Even the crowd standing outside the battlefield were shivering wildly, but their attention was focused on trying to see what was happening on the battlefield. When the cataclysmic storm had faded away, Yi Futian was still standing in the air and Huang Zhuge was still standing on the ground, as though the two of them had never moved. The wind had a stinging sensation to it. Hissing. As a soft voice sounded out, Huang Zhuge spewed out blood as his knees trembled like he did not have the strength to continue standing. However, he kept his body straight and did not collapse. "It's your victory," Huang Zhuge said dejectedly. The last strike of the polearm was as though the heavens had given all its strength to it, crushing everything in its way. "It was luck," Yi Futian replied. He was indeed lucky. Only he himself knew how much strength he had used to win the battle. It was too difficult. If it had not been for the 6th strike of the 9 heavenly strikes, the one who had been defeated would still be him. The simple conversation by the two of them made the countless onlookers freeze and the area fell silent. The final battle for the Holy Ji Palace. Yi Futian first. Chapter 581. The Holy Ji Palace chose disciples once every 3 years. It was a huge event in the barren state. So many prides came from the 9 holy roads. They were all talents famous in their own places and now, they were all gathered here. The Holy Ji Palace chose disciples once every 3 years. It was a huge event in the barren state. So many prides came from the 9 holy roads. They were all talents famous in their own places and now, they were all gathered here. After the rounds of eliminations, the final powerful group lasted until the end. And in the end, Yi Futian of the Dawn Road was number 1. Until now, many people were still unclear about Yi Futian's background. Some said he was from the Eastern Barren Territory. He'd defeated all the famous figures from the barren state. He'd humiliated Bai Zai and shockingly defeated Huang Jioge with one staff. From now on, everyone in the barren state would know Yi Futian's name. Hua Jieyu's pretty eyes gazed at the figure on the battlefield. She thought back to when she was 15 years old. During the fall quarter examination of the Qingzhou Academy, the youth had shown his brilliance for the first time and received first place in the written examination. At that time he'd been young and frivolous. He was as pure as a flawless jade and filled with endless fantasies about the future. Now they were adults and had experienced the hardships of life. What never changed was that no matter where they went, he was still the brightest star. Bai Zai, Yanjiu, Bing Yi and Chu Shang of the mortal world, Nan Hao and Nan Feng of the Nantian house, and many other figures all had complicated feelings. Who would have thought that Yi Futian would reach the highest spot in the end? Gu Yunqi's smile was brilliant. She hadn't improved much through this trip, but she was very satisfied. These experiences would probably be unforgettable for life. However, it was a pity that she probably wouldn't be able to hear Yi Futian play his guqin in the future. He probably wouldn't return to the Celestial Pavilion anymore. Do you see it, old man? Chun Yuan asked Mu Chuan. When did I ever lie to you? Mu Chuan didn't refute it. Instead he said, you're really willing to give someone like this to the Holy Ji Palace? The rock will always soar in the 9 heavens. Are you looking out for me? Chun Yuan asked. No matter what, he's the one I chose. He's the son of the Starry School. As the saying went, if a tree stood out from the forest, the wind would destroy it. Being too extraordinary attracted the wrong type of attention, like the Blazing Sun School against Yi Futian. In the barren state, the Holy Ji Palace was the best place for Yi Futian to cultivate. It was filled with talents who were all the best cultivators from around the barren state. Here Yi Futian would compete with the top figures. It would be like a battle between pavilions. The disciples who'd entered the Holy Ji Palace 3 or 6 years ago would all become the motivation for Yi Futian to improve. It was rumored that the competition between the disciples was very intense. Next, it was time for the big figures to choose their disciples. Countless eyes looked in the direction of the Holy Ji Palace. Who would become the teachers of the top 10 talents? Phoenix, Zhuge Hua Jieyu, if you wish, you can cultivate under me. Sage Daozong invited. Earlier, Phoenix had said that he wished to cultivate under him. Sage Daozong was well learned and was the chief of the Daozong Pavilion. Many people were willing to enter it. Su Ke, if you wish, you can cultivate under me. The sword demon invited Su Ke because the youth had said he wanted to learn swordsmanship with him. Su Ke, Huang, you can enter the Tianqing Pavilion. Another strong cultivator said. It was Sage Tianqing, chief of the Tianqing Pavilion, one of the top 6 pavilions. It was in charge of the laws of the Holy Ji Palace. Bai Zai, Zhuge Hua Jieyu, if you wish, you can cultivate in the Holy Sage Pavilion, an elder from the Holy Sage Pavilion said at that time. This wasn't an invitation straight from the pavilion's second chief, but the elder's words represented the pavilion. The Holy Sage Pavilion had invited Bai Zai, Zhuge and Hua Jieyu instead of Yi Futian, who had defeated the first 2, and was the winner of the battle. The Holy Sage Pavilion was the top pavilion of the Holy Ji Palace. Huang Jioge wasn't invited, because he'd already said that he wouldn't enter the Holy Ji Palace. Xiao Junyi wasn't invited, because he was a disciple of the Dark Sage. The Dark Sage had a bad reputation in the barren state. So the Holy Ji Palace obviously wouldn't accept Xiao Junyi, who cultivated with dark power. But what about Yi Futian? Yu Shang and Yuan Zhan hadn't been invited either. Many people were confused. Some even started whispering amongst themselves. This was the Holy Sage Pavilion. They couldn't help but start thinking about the invitations. Was it because of Yi Futian and Bai Zai's battle? That battle had shown that Yi Futian and Bai Zai probably couldn't coexist. Then the Holy Sage Pavilion probably chose Bai Zai over Yi Futian because of Bai Luli. As for why they also invited Zhuge and Hua Jieyu, everyone knew that it probably wasn't aimed at Yi Futian. It was because Zhuge Qingfeng, patriarch of the Zhuge family, was also a disciple of the Holy Sage Pavilion. Zhuge and Hua Jieyu were from the Zhuge family, so it was logical to invite them. Even the other pavilions were surprised. They obviously wanted Yi Futian but didn't invite him because the winner always went to the Holy Sage Pavilion. This was an unsaid rule. They wouldn't go fight for him. But the Holy Sage Pavilion didn't want him? Yi Futian also felt this odd atmosphere. The Holy Sage Pavilion had chosen Bai Zhe and Zhuge Xing. They both had conflicts with him. Now, other than Huang Zhouge and Xiao Junyi, only He Yushang and Yuan Zhan hadn't been invited. They'd come together. There are still some left. Why are you all being so generous? That strong cultivator from the Holy Sage Pavilion said. The others realized he wanted them to choose. Clearly, the Holy Sage Pavilion wouldn't choose Yi Futian's group. It wasn't that he didn't approve of them. It was just that he'd chosen Bai Zhe and Zhuge Xing. The others could take Yi Futian. If you're all willing, you can cultivate in the Daozong Pavilion, Sage Daozong said, smiling. He obviously wouldn't be generous. The pavilion was willing to accept anyone in the top 10, but he could only choose some for the balance. The same for the Tianqing Pavilion, the chief said. Since the Holy Sage Pavilion let them have the 3, he wouldn't let go of the chance. Elder Ning made a face. He was an elder of the Tianqing Pavilion. The Battle Sage Pavilion wants them, the King Kong Sage said. Everyone's eyes flashed and turned towards him. However, other than the Wanxiang Pavilion, the 5 pavilions of the core island had chosen less than 100 people. Those who entered the main pavilions were even fewer. Yi Futian's group had benefited the most. Under everyone's eyes, they'd become war gods with one battle. Everyone knew them, and now, they'd also become disciples of the Sage Dozhan, 7th on the Barren Sky ranking. They truly shot to the top. Nanfeng, Bingyi, Yanjiu and the others who'd had conflicts with Yi Futian felt troubled. Yi Futian's status was above them now. Chapter 582. In the direction of the Holy Ji Palace, everyone looked at the crowd below and many smiled. In the direction of the Holy Ji Palace, everyone looked at the crowd below and many smiled. Catch. At that time there were various sounds. Many big figures reached out, throwing numerous badges downward. A badge appeared before everyone who would cultivate in the 6 pavilions of the Holy Ji Palace. It was naturally the same for Yi Futian. The badge that hovered before him had the word battle carved on it. They put a shred of spiritual energy into it and then put it away. This represented their status as a disciple of the Holy Ji Palace. You have 3 months to take care of the matters in the outside world and then enter the pavilion. Of course you can enter now. As for the future, you will listen to your elders, the elder on the steps said. The audition for new disciples will end now. Many friends are from all over the barren state. You can return now, the man continued. The big figures of the Holy Ji Palace rose. They either walked towards the pavilion or started chatting amongst each other. It's over, everyone in the vast crowd thought. It would be another 3 years before the next great event. In the direction of the pavilion, Bai Luli stood up. He gazed at everyone present. Instead of going to his brother Bai Zhe, he turned and left with the elders of the Holy Sage Pavilion. Bai Luli was young, but only the big figures of the Holy Ji Palace knew about his status. Finally, it's over. Yi Futian looked at the King Kong sage who'd turned to leave and smiled. During this journey he'd entered the noble plane, comprehended various martial arts intents, and entered the Battle Sage Pavilion. This was perfect for him. From now on, he had a place in the barren state. He wouldn't be pretending to be dead and escaping for his life like before. He wondered what those from the Blazing Sun School and Bright Moon School would think now. Many people gathered. Hua Jieyu walked to his side. She grabbed his hand and their eyes met, smiling. Hua Jieyu had chosen the Daozong Pavilion and they wouldn't cultivate together. But they were still both in the Holy Ji Palace. They could meet often. They wouldn't be separated for years like before. Remember what you promised me. Yi Futian fluttered his lashes. He still had it in his mind. Hua Jieyu stomped on his foot. Yushang, Yi Wuchen, Yi Shaoshi and Yuan Zhan walked over too. Yi Wuchen would enter the Sword Pavilion to cultivate with the Sword Demon. The others would join the Battle Sage Pavilion. However, Lulan Shui and the Black Wind Eagle didn't enter the Holy Ji Palace. Yi Futian didn't know if they could stay by his side. Zhuge Mingyue walked over and smiled. You two can finally fly together, she said to Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu. Senior sister, Hua Jieyu said, a bit shy. Yi Futian also called out, senior sister. His eyes were emotional. His second senior sister always thought for him. When could she truly be with third senior brother? They face much more pressure than Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu. After all, they've been dating for a long time and were close to the parents. What are you doing? Trying to get emotional? Zhuge Mingyue's smile was bright. I helped you take care of Jieyu for more than 2 years. Now she's yours. Yes. Yi Fuxia nodded forcefully. Then he asked, oh right, senior sister, if I cultivate in the Holy Ji Palace, can Lulan Shui and Little Eagle come too? He'd heard that even those from the 1,000 Holy Islands couldn't enter the core island easily. Those who cultivate under a pavilion's chief can bring their family. You can too, Zhuge Mingyue said. The inheritor chosen personally by the pavilion chief natural had a different status. Understood. Yi Futian nodded. Zhuge Mingyue grinned at him. Then she reached out to pet Yi Futian's head. It's so great to see you all grow up bit by bit, she said, smiling. It probably won't be long before you really can take care of me. I'll be able to relax then. It won't be that long. Yi Futian smiled. Junior, you must cultivate well. Beiteng Xinger's eyes shone with anticipation. She knew that even though second senior sister always took care of Jieyu and the Yi Futian, she actually had high expectations for Yi Futian. One day he would be able to soar in the heavens and create the cottage in their hearts. Xiaoshi, the junior has surpassed you. Just keep eating and get fatter, Zhuge Mingyue said, looking at Yi Xiaoshi. Yi Xiaoshi was frustrated. He lowered his head and sighed. He couldn't refute it and he was ashamed. Remember to take care of the junior, Zhuge Mingyue reminded. I know, senior sister, the fatty said dejectedly. I'm going now, Zhuge Mingyue said. Where are you going? Yi Futian asked. Going to my family, of course. Come visit when you're free. Zhuge Mingyue smiled and left. Beiteng Xinger followed, but she turned around to wave goodbye at Yi Futian's group. Zhuge Mingyue walked over to Zhuge Kanyang's side and whispered, let's go. Zhuge Kanyang glanced at Yi Futian before leaving the family members away. Zhuge Xing also left. Your senior sister seems to treat you very well, Chen Yuan whispered, walking over. Of course. Second senior sister is the best senior sister in the world. Yi Futian looked at Zhuge Mingyue's back with a bright smile. His senior sisters and brothers were his closest family in the world. What's your plan? Chen Yuan asked. Will you enter the Holy Ji Palace right away? I promised Yuan Zhan that I'll visit Mount Taiheng with him and visit the seniors of the Ape Clan, Yi Futian said. That works too. Mount Taiheng is on the way to the Divine Sky City. I can take you there. Chen Yuan nodded. He wondered if the story behind Yi Futian and Mount Taiheng had something to do with the staff technique. Would you like to visit Divine Sky City? That long girl probably misses you, Chen Yuan said, smiling. He'd like to see the expressions of Yang Ding and Gong Kui. Sure. Yi Futian nodded. I miss Linger too. Don't misunderstand. She's my sister, Yi Futian explained after seeing Hua Jieyu look over. A sister. Hua Jieyu nodded and smiled. What kind of expression is that? Yi Futian felt awkward. Futian, I want to visit the Eastern Barren Territory, Yi Wuchen suddenly said. Yi Futian's eyes flashed. He obviously knew why Yi Wuchen said that. The Lu Kingdom of the Eastern Barren Territory had had huge changes, so Lu Qinyu was still there. After losing her parents, she only had her brother, Lu Feiyang. Back then they'd snuck away. It had been more than 2 years. Wuchen definitely missed her. Now that Yi Futian and Jieyu were together again, they'd settled down. Wuchen naturally would think of Qinyu. Okay, Jieyu and I miss our master and masteress too. And big brother. Yi Futian smiled and nodded. Chief, can you help me with something? I understand. Chen Yuan nodded. Yi Futian's group would be slow when traveling to the Eastern Barren Territory, but if a sage was with them, they would become much faster. Yi Futian looked around to his friends. Mu Jiqiu, Qin Yin Li Qingyi and Xia Wuji were standing there, looking at him. What, we're strangers now? Yi Futian asked. Are you all preparing to leave? I'm going to the island, Mu Jiqiu whispered. Jiqiu, what are you talking to that guy for? Mu Chuan yelled. Chen Yuan rolled his eyes. Was this old guy still pretending to be strong? I'm leaving. In the future, I'll cultivate in the core island too. Mu Jiqiu said to Yi Futian before leaving. Yi Futian smiled. I believe you. We prepare to go back too, Qingyin said. She hadn't been chosen. Yi Futian nodded. Qingyi, if you don't wish to go back, you can cultivate in the Starry School in the Divine Sky City. Li Sun had died in his hands. White Sovereign City wouldn't dare to take revenge on him, but it would be hard for Li Qingyi. No need. Li Qingyi shook her head. The city lord was her father and her mother was still there. How could she not return? Qingyin, can you let Qingyi cultivate in Mount Jiuxian? You can go back with her. Yi Futian asked Qingyin. I would do it even if you don't tell me. Qingyin nodded. We'll go back together too, Xinyuan Beishan said. Take care, Yi Futian said. Take care. Everyone nodded. Master Yi wish you the best future. Many people looked over at Yi Futian now. They were the people who traveled the Dawn Road with Yi Futian. You too, Yi Futian said, smiling. Then he soared into the air, preparing to depart. Many people from the Dawn Road waved at Yi Futian. The youth that they'd gotten to know on the Dawn Road had become number one in the battle. He would become a legendary figure of the Barren State in the future. It was destiny to get to know someone on the Divine Sky ranking. They might be able to brag about it in the future. Everyone began departing gradually. Countless people soared towards different directions. Chun Yuan brought Yi Futian's group and the Starry School disciples away. They rode on ritual implements. They'd come on the Holy Road and would now leave by crossing Zhongzhou City. Barren State, Mount Taihang. Sunlight fell upon the mountain. A huge golden figure sat on the mountaintop, dazzling under the sun. He stood on a boulder on the cliff. Looking into the distance, he was filled with majesty. A handsome white-clothed figure sat quietly not too far from him. He was playing his guqin. The music turned into an image that passed into the golden figure's mind. Many golden apes were watching from the distance. The mountain was silent for a long while after the music ended. The huge figure was still standing there quietly, looking into the distance. Suddenly an ape roared. The shocking roar shook the world and even the immense Mount Taihang trembled. Many golden apes rushed over. They looked at their king from afar, confusion filling their eyes. Chun Yuan and the others on Mount Taihang were shaken too. Chun Yuan didn't do anything. Since Yi Futian came, the king of the golden great apes wouldn't hurt him. He was someone on the Barren Sky ranking after all. If he really did try hurting Yi Futian, Chun Yuan wouldn't be able to stop him anyway. Just then, the great ape actually fell to his knees and kowtowed towards the distance. All the golden great apes knelt too and bowed in the same direction. Their king seemed to be worshipping something. Yi Futian watched quietly from the side. He could feel the cold sadness. Many of the demon beasts were unified. The king that led them was extremely respected. The snow ape was the ape emperor and had led all the great ape clans. This ape senior must be extremely sad to know that he had died. My name is Yuan Hong. The ape emperor had personally chosen this name for me when I was very young. At that time, the leader of the golden great apes was my father. The great ape stood up. He still looked into the distance as if reminiscing. Now they've all left me. Yuan Hong's voice sounded abnormally tired. He turned and stared at Yi Futian with his huge eyes. Tell me, he said, who are you? Excuse me. Yi Futian's eyes flashed. The ape emperor won't teach his best technique to an outsider. If you've only seen that battle, how could you learn it and coincidentally be there? Yuan Hong stared at Yi Futian. Heavy might descended. I want to know the truth. You may be the last human who was with the ape emperor. Yi Futian gazed at the great ape and nodded lightly. Let me show you another picture then. That is only natural. Chun Yuan walked over and said, this time in the Holy Ji Palace's battles, not only Yi Futian, but Yu Sheng was also accepted as a disciple by the Dozhan sage. Yi Wuchen was valued by the sword demon and taken under his department. The three of them are all direct disciples of the Holy Ji Palace's palace lords. The Gu clan leader and Madame Long looked at Yu Sheng and Yi Wuchen who were standing behind Yi Futian. They had always been very low profile beside Yi Futian and never exhibited their strength. Who could have expected that the two of them were also this outstanding? There were rumors that Yu Shang had fought his way into the top 10 with his grade 9 noble cultivation level. If he had not fought someone who specialized in spectral movement and countered him, he might have been able to make it into the top 3. College chief. Someone appeared in a flash and reported, "The Blazing Sun School and Bright Moon School college chiefs have brought people to visit." Oh. Chen Yuan had a gleam in his eyes and said, "When did they become so courteous?" He looked in the distance and had a cruel smile. He replied, "Invite them to leave. Come on, Brother Chen, don't be so quick to turn us away." At that moment a voice sounded. Then Yang Ding and Gong Kui walked in together. The 3 schools were originally passed down from the same source. Let's not be so distant. This time the Starry School's son Yi Futian has such an achievement. We're also happy for him, so we've come just to congratulate him, Yang Ding said. Yang Ding, do you even believe what you're saying? Chen Yuan looked at the other party. How hypocritical. Back then, the two of them had a huge battle and he had destroyed the Blazing Sun School twice. Yi Futian also nearly died in the hands of the Blazing Sun School. Now he was happy for Yi Futian. Brother Chen, you also have to look at it from my perspective. Back then, Yi Futian had obtained the divine teachings, but he was the Starry School's son. How did you expect me and Brother Gong to think about it? Of course, we also wanted to see what the teachings passed down by our ancestors were like, but we were fooled by little Brother Yi, Yang Ding replied. He also knew a little about the Holy Ji Palace's battles, so he naturally knew that Yi Futian's divine light did not vanish. They had been tricked. However, he was unable to kill Yi Futian now, so what else could he do? Get on his good side, of course. Yi Futian and his 2 friends had become disciples of palace lords. If just one of them entered the barren sky ranking and wanted revenge, they would be in trouble. Little Brother Yi, it was indeed my greed that made me invite you to the Blazing Sun School, but I definitely did not intend to kill you. It was that person's selfish act. He has already been killed by Brother Chen and my Blazing Sun School has been destroyed twice, suffering heavy losses. Today, I've come specially to apologize for that. Yang Ding then continued, also, since you've also received the Blazing Sun School's teachings, I have a suggestion. How about you become the son of the Divine Sky City's top 3 schools? The Starry School's disciples were all appalled. The Blazing Sun School chief had come personally to apologize for his actions and wanted to resolve the conflict they had previously. Futian has already entered the Holy Ji Palace. Why would he want the position of son? What is this icing on the cake after hitting him when he was down? Chen Yuan asked bitterly. Brother Chen, I have no such intention. That time, I was just overcome by greed and took a divine light. Gong Kui explained. But now we all understand that Yi Futian deserves to own the divine teachings. If Yi Futian is able to restore the glory of our ancestors one day, I pledge that my Bright Moon School will definitely follow him. Yi Futian scoffed when he heard Gong Kui's words. He was too hypocritical. If one day he wanted to deal with the Bright Moon School, would Gong Kui dare to go against him? My Bright Moon School is the same, Yang Ding pledged sincerely. Since the 2 elders are so sincere, I will not bear a grudge over the matter. However, there was someone who wanted my life back then in the Bright Moon School. Moreover, Shang Yunfeng's death leading to his parents assassinating me in the Celestial Pavilion felt fishy. I hope that Chief Yang can put effort into investigating, that way I will feel more at ease, Yi Futian said. Alright, I will investigate it thoroughly, Yang Ding promised. Since that is so, there is nothing else. After you've investigated the matter, Chief Yang can just notify Chief Chen. Elders, you may take your leave now, Yi Futian said. Okay, I'll be on my way to investigate it now. Yang Ding nodded. He had checked on the matter before as well, so he knew that it was indeed weird. Gong Kui also saluted and said his goodbyes. The 2 of them had come to alleviate Yi Futian's anger. Chen Yuan did not say anything. Yi Futian's handling of the matter was appropriate. The rest would be up to Yang Ding to manage. Moreover, Yi Futian did not have the ability to deal with Yang Ding and Gong Kui, so it was naturally better to make peace and settle the score in the future. Chief Chen, I should be on my way to the Eastern Barren Territory now, Yi Futian said. It was sufficient to just stop over in the Divine Sky City. He was also only going to stay for a few days in the Eastern Barren Territory. Afterward, he would go back to the Holy Ji Palace to cultivate. All right. Chen Yuan nodded and said, I'll accompany you back then. He still had to watch out for Yi Futian's safety. I'll be in your care then. Yi Futian nodded, then turned to Madame Long and said, Madam, I hope that you can take out some time to help out with the Celestial Pavilion. After all, Xin Yu and Wang Yuro were still in the Celestial Pavilion. Okay. The madam nodded and said, Why don't we let Wang Yuro come to the Starry School to cultivate? I'm sure the college chief will agree. Yes. Chen Yuan was naturally fine with it. Thank you, madam. Yi Futian smiled and nodded. I want to follow Big Brother Futian and play too. Long Linger said. Again. The madam glared at her. Haha, it's fine to bring Linger along. I'll come back together with her, Chen Yuan said. I guess so. The madam shook her head helplessly and said, Sorry to trouble you, college chief. Let's go, Chen Yuan said, and the group flew into the air. The Starry School's disciples all looked at the figures in the distance. They could probably only look up to Yi Futian in the future. The Gu clan leader pat his daughter Gu Yunxi on the shoulder and said gently, Let's go. Gu Yunxi nodded lightly. In the Eastern Barren Territory, the situation had stabilized after the revolution. The college had become the only holy land in the Eastern Barren Territory. There were no other factions that could match it. The Sword Saint was already a sage plane cultivator, and Mr. Du leaving back then had caused a huge commotion in the Eastern Barren Territory. Now there were 3 factions on the Book Mountain: the college, the Sword Saint Mountain, and the Moon Clan. However, there was only the college now. The Qin dynasty, the Lu Kingdom, and many other factions had become a thing of the past. Apart from the college, there were only the Witch Clan and Qianqiu Temple still standing as elite factions. Now, the Witch Clan's witches were also cultivating in the college. The college did not discriminate and was willing to impart their teachings to all. At that moment, in a courtyard on the Book Mountain, a group of people was seated around a table having a feast. It appeared especially crowded. Feng Lu, now you and Yixiang are both in the noble plane. I also have to cultivate harder. Otherwise, I'll be caught up by you two gradually. An elegant figure smiled and said. On that person there was an imperial aura, and by his side, there was a pair of teenagers who looked extraordinary. Brother Yi, it was only thanks to your protection back then that we have our achievements today. Hua Fenglu was still his handsome and suave self. The person sitting opposite him was the Emperor of the Hundred Lands Kangyi Kingdom, Emperor Yi. You're being too distant. If I did not know you, I would not have the chance to come often to the college to cultivate. I am able to lead such a carefree life as the Emperor, occasionally coming to the Eastern Barren Territory's Holy Land to cultivate. If it was in the past, who would dare to imagine that? Now you don't know how respectful the other emperors are to me and Emperor Nandu. Emperor Yi laughed and said. Indeed. Beside him, Nandu Wenshan nodded in agreement. Hua Fenglu and Nandu Wenin also smiled. They were now getting older and leading contented lives. Emperor Yi would often invite Nandu Wenshan and Yixiang to come to the Book Mountain to visit him. A group of old friends sitting around and chatting was indeed an enjoyable pastime. Chapter 584. Good day, elders. At that moment, an alluring figure walked in, a jug of wine in her hands. The woman was extremely beautiful and her eyes had a hint of quick-wittedness. Good day, elders. At that moment, an alluring figure walked in, a jug of wine in her hands. The woman was extremely beautiful and her eyes had a hint of quick-wittedness. This young lady is? Emperor Yi asked Hua Fenglu. This girl is the famous Witch Clan's Witch Gu Bua. She was sent to the college to cultivate, but she's been running to my place very conscientiously. I don't know what she's after. Hua Fenglu replied, smiling. Elder, you've misunderstood Bua. The college chief knows that all of you are here, so he specifically gave the order for a jug of fine wine to be sent here. This wine is rumored to be able to improve one's constitution, and is beneficial to cultivation, Gu Bua claimed, smiling. Thank the college chief for me, Nandu Wenin said, smiling. Little Bua, come over and sit with us too. These few years, the Sword Saint had taken very good care of them, and would often send over precious materials to improve their cultivation and potential. If it was not for the Sword Saint, Emperor Yi would not be able to come so often to the Book Mountain to cultivate. Okay. Gu Biyue smiled, taking a seat at the table. She asked, I've heard that all of you here today are Yi Futian's elders. Do you all have any stories to share? Trying to get news about my disciple again? Hua Fenglu looked at Gu Biyue and continued, I've already told you you don't stand a chance. I'm just curious. Gu Biyue looked back at Hua Fenglu and said, moreover, if I had met Yi Futian earlier, maybe your daughter wouldn't have had a chance either. You sure are thick-skinned. Yi Qingxian smiled faintly and said with a joking tone. Gu Biyue consistently came over, so they were all familiar with her. If you have the talent you can learn it too, Gu Biyue replied, grinning. Speaking of that fellow, I wonder how his cultivation level is after leaving for so long. Yi Xiang also missed Yi Futian and Yu Shang. He had not seen the two of them for an even longer time. They should have reached the upper arcana plane, Hua Fenglu predicted. That's only around my level, Gu Biyue said. I've stepped into the upper arcana plane a few days ago. Probably, I wonder if Futian has gone to find Jieyu. Nanda Wenin sighed and continued. Her second sister is supposed to be from an elite faction in the Barren State. Futian's going to suffer. Why don't you feel sorry for my disciple? Yi Xiang asked Nanda Wenin. You're not sorry for Futian? Nanda Wenin smiled, asking back. Why would I care about that fellow? Yi Xiang was reluctant to admit it. That's right, that fellow is so sly, he's probably being free and easy. Tang Lan also chipped in. Auntie Tang, you're speaking badly about me again. At that moment, a voice sounded in the distance. The people at the table were all stunned. Then they all stood up and raised their heads. They saw a group of people flying in the air, and the people at the front were Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu. Dad, Mom! Hua Jieyu shouted. Hua Fenglu had not come around from the surprise. It was only until Hua Jieyu landed in front of him that he broke into a brilliant smile. Master, Mistress, Old Manny, Emperor Yi, why are you all here? Yi Futian said, smiling. The group landed and Yi Xiang saw Yi Futian's complacent smile and said, Looks like Tang Feng guessed correctly. You are indeed free and easy. Master Qingxian Yu Shang walked forward saying. Yi Qingshuan's eyes were moist, but she was still smiling. She only felt like crying. That fellow actually managed to find you. Hua Fenglu looked at Hua Jieyu and said. The Hua Jieyu now had an even more eminent aura, but she had gotten skinnier. Yes. Hua Jieyu nodded her head lightly and said, Dad, your disciple is really splendid. Hua Fenglu did a double take. It was like they said, daughters would always side with their husbands. Look at her, praising her man in front of her father. Wuxian. At that moment, Emperor Yi looked towards Yi Wuxian. Uncle, Yi Wuxian also addressed him. Your father often talks about you. These few years Chenyu has gone back to see them a few times. Do go back home to visit since you're back, Emperor Yi said. Okay. Yi Wuxian was miserable upon Emperor Ye's words and said, I'll go find Chenyu. Go ahead, Emperor Yi smiled and Yi Wuxian shot off like a sword from its sheath towards the top of the mountain. Noble plain. Emperor Ye's gaze focused and he said, amazed. A noble plain cultivator could be an emperor of a country in the 100 lands. Now Yi Wuxian had entered the noble plain at such a young age. Wuxian has entered the noble plain? Hua Fenglu looked in his direction and asked. Yes. Yi Futian nodded and said, Master, Yu Shang and I have entered the noble plain. Do you want to spar with us? Hua Fenglu saw Yi Futian's cheeky smile and ignored him. He looked at Hua Jieyu and said, Jieyu, as your father, I need to seriously consider your relationship between you and Yi Futian. Father-in-law, I was wrong. Yi Futian quickly walked behind Hua Fenglu and massaged his back for him, saying, Master, don't stoop to my level. You're already a noble plain cultivator, and you still don't care about your image. How preposterous, Hua Fenglu said. In Hua Fenglu's mind, a noble plain cultivator was already able to hold his own in any region. I don't need any image in front of Master. Yi Futian said. I was painstakingly brought up by you. Those words are pleasing to my ear. Hua Fenglu nodded his head with no reservations. I can't stand this master-disciple pair. Nanda Wenin smiled and shook her head. Haven't you gotten used to it yet? Nanda Wenshan stood beside her laughing. He had heard from Hua Fenglu that when he was first disabled, it was Yi Futian who had carried him into Donghai City. At that time, they were given the cold shoulder by many people, and were taken in by Tang Feng. Thinking back, it was really a desolate period, but thankfully that was all in the past. The relationship between the two of them was probably like father and son. Uncle, you're here too. Yi Futian addressed him. After all, he was a sweet talker. Yes, the Sword Saint allowed us to come to the Book Mountain whenever we like, Nanda Wunshan replied. Big brother is really meticulous. Yi Futian nodded his head. Then his gaze turned towards Yidanshan, Yilingxi. The witch Gu Biyue was also here. This made him curious. What are you looking at? Gu Biyue saw Yi Futian's confused look and asked, Are you surprised? You, why are you here? Yi Futian asked curiously. She had once cultivated in the Moon Clan. You're back. The Sword Saint smiled, nodding his head. He then saw Yi Shaoshi and asked, Why didn't Shui Yi and Luofan come back with you? They should have met up with your second sister and Xinger? Since Yi Futian had brought Hua Jieyu back, he should have found the Zhuge clan. Heh. Yi Shaoshi nodded and replied, Second sister had a mission for fourth and fifth brother, so we did not come back together. Did you see your third brother? The Sword Saint asked again. I saw him once. Third brother is a sage plane cultivator now. Big brother can rest easy, Yi Futian replied. I'm naturally not worried about Donglio's cultivation. However, with his personality, he could easily offend others outside, the Sword Saint replied. He then turned his gaze towards Chan Yuan, who was standing at the side, and said, Elder. The college's disciples were all stunned. The Sword Saint had addressed that elderly person as elder. How high was that person's cultivation level? No need to be courteous, Chan Yuan said. I'm only accompanying Futian back this time. It looks like my presence is making all of you uneasy. I wanted to tour around the Eastern Barren territory as well. You can go ahead. As he said that, Chan Yuan moved in a flash and left the area. How fast? Many people were astounded. The Sword Saint asked curiously, Who is that elder? The college chief of the Divine Sky City's Starry School, in the eastern region of the Barren State. I stayed there for a while after I went to the Barren State, and the college chief treated me very well, Yi Futian replied. Will you be cultivating there in the future? The Sword Saint asked. No. I will be going with Jieyu, Yushang and the rest to the core of the Barren State, Zhongzhou City's Holy Ji Palace, to cultivate. If Big Brother wants to look for me, you can go there directly, Yi Futian replied and changed the topic. Let's not talk about this for now. When will I be able to attend Big Brother's wedding? When the members of the cottage gather once again, probably. The Sword Saint sighed. He had not forgotten his teacher, who had been taken away. Big Brother, I want to visit the cottage, Yi Futian said. All right, I'll accompany you there. Now, the cottage is used by the disciples who used to be from the Moon Clan, the Sword Saint said, and the two of them made their way to the cottage. Many people looked at their figures and started discussing. What kind of place was the Holy Ji Palace? Yi Futian was actually accompanied by an extremely strong sage plane cultivator on the way back. What did he do outside? They could hardly imagine it. Some of the younger disciples had only entered the Book Mountain for less than 2 years. Their expressions were filled with admiration. Was that the legendary Yi Futian who had killed off multiple experts in the Sky Mountain fight? He looked so young. What a pity that they were unable to meet the cottage's second and third disciple. They wondered what cultivation level Yi Futian was at now. Among the disciples, there was an extremely appealing girl standing there quietly. She had ravishing looks and a graceful demeanor. She was one of the top 3 beauties of the Eastern Barren State, Chu Yaoya. She had seen him again. He was still the same as before, but he appeared to be more magnificent now. Yi Futian and the Sword Saint strolled in the cottage, looking at the familiar buildings that had changed. They walked all the way to the back mountain, discussing certain matters. Yi Futian briefly told the Sword Sage about his experiences in the Barren State and about his second sister and third brother. The cool wind swept past and the two of them walked to the cliff. The Sword Saint looked at the clouds and said, With Donglio's personality, he likely will not step into the Zhuge clan without defeating Bai Luli. However, if it's really like you said, Bai Luli is the 10th on the Barren Sky ranking, how would he be defeated so easily? Donglu can only depend on himself. Big Brother, have you ever thought of venturing out? Yi Futian asked. The Eastern Barren territory carries teachers' dreams. He had always wanted to use peaceful methods to achieve it. Unfortunately, things often go contrary to one's wishes. Now that I have the chance, I will naturally help teacher to achieve it. Until then, I will not think about the future. The Sword Saint smiled and said, the law power emphasizes following one's heart. One's cultivation and mindset is the same. Yi Futian nodded. With Big Brother's current mindset, it was an alternative form of cultivation. He could feel that Big Brother was different from before. Little brother, do you know why your brothers and sisters have such high hopes for you? The Sword Saint asked. Yi Futian shook his head, but he knew that his brothers and sisters doted on him the most. That's because you are the person that teacher was truly looking for. The Sword Saint looked in the distance and said, I trust teacher. Little brother, maybe nobody knows how your future will be like now, but if there's one person who can find teacher, it will definitely be you. I will work hard. Yi Futian nodded his head sincerely. Me too, the Sword Saint said. The college will forever be your home. If you run into trouble outside, tell me. Your big brother's cultivation level may not be high, but I will do my best to strive for the day where I can personally witness the expectations that teacher had for you come to fruition. I also want to see that sight. Yi Futian smiled radiantly and said, Big brother, it's a promise. It's a promise. The Sword Saint nodded. Perhaps she was already different from birth and was enlightened after the huge incident. The barren state is vast and boundless, so I am not very familiar with cultivation places in the barren state, Yi Futian replied. He then turned towards Chen Yuan and asked, Does Chief Chen know any? Chen Yuan looked at Hua Qingqing. He could feel that Hua Qingqing was indeed extraordinary. He had never seen such a pure person before. Her unblemished eyes were crystal clear, like a pool of clear water. The barren state indeed has a Buddhist ground, but they emphasize that Buddhism will only be taught to those who are destined for it, and rarely take in disciples, Chen Yuan replied. If they see her, they will definitely take her in. The Qinshu Temple abbot saluted and said, This benefactor must be an elder from the barren state. Could we have a word in private? Chen Yuan looked at Yi Futian and saw him nodding, so he replied, Sure. Qingqing, follow me, the Qinshu Temple abbot said, and the three of them left together, making Yi Futian's group curious. Not long after they came back, but Chen Yuan's expression was peculiar, and he kept looking at Hua Qingqing. Chief Chen, Yi Futian looked towards Chen Yuan and called out, If Hua Qingqing heads there will be no problem. Chen Yuan declared certainly this time. Yi Futian did not know what the abbot and Chief Chen had discussed to make him this certain. I am not well versed enough in the Buddhist teachings, thus my cultivation level is low. I might not have much of a say in this. Could I trouble Benefactor Chen to help me make the referral? The abbot asked Chen Yuan. Chen Yuan's gaze landed on Yi Futian again, as though asking for Yi Futian's opinion. Chief Chen, Hua Qingqing is my good friend, Yi Futian said. Okay. Chen Yuan agreed to the matter. Thank you very much. Since that is so, I will not be following the group. The Qinshu Temple abbot looked at Hua Qingqing and said, Qingqing, this is where we part ways. Take care of yourself, abbot. Hua Qingqing nodded, smiling. Fate would come and go in circles. Although she was reluctant, she accepted it nonetheless. Benefactor Yi, I'll be troubling you then. The abbot bowed to Yi Futian. Master, there is no need to do that. Yi Futian returned the bow and said, Since the master trusts me, I will naturally do my best. How could I not trust the character of a cottage disciple? The abbot smiled and said his goodbyes. After doing that, he turned around and left as quickly as he had come. Hua Qingqing bowed in the direction that the monk had left in. The 2 years that she had spent in the Qinshu Temple had healed the scars from back then, and she had found that the way of the Buddha appeared to be the most suitable for her. Duao is dead. Yi Futian looked to Hua Qingqing beside him and said. Hua Qingqing was shocked and stared at Yi Futian. A teardrop appeared in her eyes and she said silently, Thank you. Although she cultivated in Buddhism, how could she be void of emotion? Duao had destroyed the Donghua clan and killed her mother in front of her back then. How could she not hate him? It's all over now. Yi Futian smiled tenderly. Yes. Hua Qingqing nodded. That year, after they had separated in the snowstorm on the Sky Mountain, she had not expected that they would meet again. She was very thankful for the reunion. "Let's go," Yi Futian said. He turned around looking at all the familiar figures. His big brother, Master and Masteress Yixiang, Emperor Yi and the rest, then waved to them and said coolly, "I'm leaving. Lad, take good care of Jiayu." Hua Fenglu laughed as he reminded him. With this fellow's luck with women, he could not help but worry. "Yushang, I leave Qingxian with you," Yixiang also told him. "All right, rest assured, Master." Yushang nodded solemnly. Yi Qingxuan's eyes were puffy. She would follow Yi Futian and Yushang this time to the distant barren state and probably not see her father for a long time. Chun Yuan took out his flight ritual implement and flew into the clouds. The wind blowing on his body, Yi Futian looked at the people around him and broke into a radiant smile. This time Qingxian, Chenyu and Lu Feiyang were too. Lu Chenyu would follow Yi Wuqian to the Holy Ji Palace, while Lu Feiyang would follow Chun Yuan to the Starry School to cultivate. In the following period of time, he was prepared to cultivate seriously in the Holy Ji Palace and do his best to raise his cultivation level. Now that he was in the noble plane, his next target was to become a sage. If he entered the sage plane, he would be considered an influential figure even in the barren state, capable of setting up his own sect or clan. Even alone, he would be able to make a name for himself in the barren state. After Yi Futian's group had left, a group of people continued to stay on the Book Mountain, reluctant to leave. "Let's go back," the Sword Saint said to the crowd, and the college's disciples started to leave. However, there were still people who continued to stare at the disappearing figures. The witch Gu Bu sighed softly. "How heartless." Chu Yaoyao also looked dejected. Hua Qingqing, who had often been mentioned in conjunction with her in the past, had also followed him to the barren state. The Sword Saint left and walked to the peak of the Book Mountain. He walked at the edge, looking at the scenery below the mountain and beyond. In the silence he started to miss his teacher. Behind the Sword Saint there was a pavilion. At that moment, beside the pavilion, a figure appeared there abruptly. The figure was dressed in gray robes and had no aura, as though he did not even exist. The Sword Saint appeared to feel something, causing him to turn around. When he saw the figure, he bowed slightly and called out, "Elder, how is your cultivation in the techniques that I taught you?" The gray-robed figure asked. "I have had some progress, but the technique is too profound. I still need more time," the Sword Saint replied calmly. The gray-robed figure nodded briskly and continued, "Although your potential is ordinary, your mindset is outstanding and your will is firm. Those two will be able to make up for the lacking in your potential. The techniques that I have made you cultivate are also the most suitable for your mindset. Decipher it comprehensively, and you will reach a high level of attainment." The Sword Saint nodded. Naturally, he could feel that too. "Elder, who are you? Why are you doing this?" the Sword Saint asked. "With your mindset, you should not be asking this. Don't bother asking in the future. Just treat this as a surprise opportunity and that I did not exist. Otherwise, I will make you disappear along with the college." The gray-robed figure looked apathetically at the Sword Saint. That one look made the Sword Saint feel as though he had been seen through. He was already in the sage plane, but he still had such a feeling. It showed how high the other party's cultivation level was. This mysterious character was likely to be the strongest person he had ever met in his life, even stronger than his teacher. A gust of wind blew past and the gray-robed figure had disappeared without a trace, like he had never been there. However, in the air, a sound entered the Sword Saint's ear. Throughout the ages, countless heroes, however prodigious they were, have faded to dust, but you will be history's witness. The voice was faint and disappeared with the wind. The Sword Saint stared at the disappearing figure with a serious expression, emotion surging from his heart. Throughout the ages, how many heroes had there been? He naturally could not be considered the genius of a generation. How was he going to witness history? Turning around, the Sword Saint looked in the distance, his expression composed. Nobody knew what he was thinking. Only time would tell. Chapter 586. The magnificent and enormous Zhongzhou city lay in the barren state. Nobody knew how many powerful forces there were in this ancient city. In the central region of Zhongzhou City was the endless holy river where the 1,000 holy islands could be found. The magnificent and enormous Zhongzhou City lay in the barren state. Nobody knew how many powerful forces there were in this ancient city. In the central region of Zhongzhou City was the endless holy river where the 1,000 holy islands could be found. Suddenly, a group of cultivators flew by in the sky and landed at the center of the 1,000 holy islands. A towering city was standing at the heart of the 1,000 holy islands, which looked just like a castle in the sky. The group of cultivators was precisely Yi Futian and the others who had just returned from the eastern barren territory. At the moment they were in front of the sky stairwell, standing in a ritual implement which was floating in the sky. Staring into the distance, Chen Yuan said, "We're here." Yi Futian looked at Chen Yuan and smiled. "Chief Chen, thank you for helping us in the journey. Don't mention it. I didn't waste too much time either," Chen Yuan said, unconcerned. "After you enter the Holy Ji Palace, focus on cultivation. The palace gathers the geniuses from various places of the barren state, many of whom are successors of top forces. Be careful in what you do." "Yes, I will." Yi Futian nodded. "I'll leave Qingqing to you. Don't worry about it. I'll send her to the place." Chen Yuan nodded. Yi Futian then looked at Hua Qingqing and said, "Take care." "Okay." Hua Qingqing nodded, smiling brightly. Her journey was filled with uncertainty, but she was very calm and did not think too much about it. Everything would only depend on her destiny. Young ones, work hard. Chen Yuan scanned everyone, after which he controlled the ritual implement and left with Hua Qingqing. Yi Futian stared at Chen Yuan as he flew off into the distance. Hua Jieyu smiled gently and asked, "You feel sad that she's leaving?" "Shay." Yi Futian blinked his eyes. Smiling, he looked at Hua Jieyu and asked back, "Are you jealous? Hua Qingqing is such a pitiful girl. Moreover, she's pure and flawless. Even women would be attracted to her. It'd be such a pity for her to become a nun. If you like her, I can pretend that I can't see anything." Hua Jieyu smiled warmly. "Really?" Yi Futian muttered to himself as he stared at Hua Jieyu doubtfully. "This fox. When does she speak the truth?" Looking at her smile, Yi Futian was determined not to fall for her trap. He held her hand and said, "You're the only one in my heart. Let's go into the palace." Hua Jieyu covered her mouth and giggled, while Yu Shang and the rest all looked at Yi Futian in contempt. How could she believe him? Nevertheless, at the moment, Yu Shang and Yi Wuchen were also accompanied by beautiful ladies. Yi Futian, Hua Jieyu, Yu Shang, Yi Wuchen, Yuan Zhan, Yi Shaoshi, Yi Qingxian, Lu Chenyu, Lulan Shui, and the Black-Winged Condor were all present. The group was in its prime. Stepping onto the sky stairwell, they saw a grand gate before them. A group of cultivators was standing there like statues, guarding the palace. When Yi Futian and his friends reached the gate, the gatekeeper stared at them and one of them asked, "Who are you?" Yi Futian and his friends took out their palace decrees, after which they said their names and identities. "So you're going to Battle Sage Palace, Daozong Palace, and Sword Pavilion. They're all at different places. Those who are going to Battle Sage Palace, follow me. Those going to Daozong Palace, follow me. Those going to Sword Pavilion, come here." 3 statue-like cultivators walked out. Yi Futian and his friends walked behind the respective cultivators. "Jieyu Wuchen Chenyu, I'll go look for you later," Yi Futian said. Hua Jieyu was going to Daozong Palace, Yi Wuchen to Sword Pavilion, while Yi Futian and a few others were going to Battle Sage Palace. Hua Jieyu and Yi Wuchen nodded. Then they followed their respective gatekeepers and flew into the sky. "Senior, which pavilion do you belong to?" Yi Futian asked the cultivator who was leading the way. "The gatekeepers belong to Tianqing Pavilion," the cultivator replied. "Apart from the things within the 6 pavilions, all the rules and other stuff are controlled by Tianqing Pavilion." "I got it." Yi Futian nodded. "Where are the 6 pavilions located?" "From here, if you go straight forward, you'll see the tallest range of palaces. That's Holy Sage Pavilion. The pavilion closest to it is Wanxiang Pavilion, which is located on the left, while Battle Sage Palace is on the right. Daozong Palace is next to Wanxiang Pavilion, while Sword Pavilion is close to Battle Sage Palace. Tianqing Pavilion is at the center of the island. You'll find out soon enough," the gatekeeper replied. Yi Futian listened to him attentively as they advanced forward. Below them they could see many tall buildings and some other cultivators. Yi Futian saw gigantic towers, mountains and cultivating caves, many lively streets and numerous relic-like places. This island city, located on top of a mountain, was indeed extremely vast. The Holy Ji Palace was different from any place he had visited in the past. After a while, Yi Futian saw a chain of magnificent golden palaces appear before him. It sat on the ground like a golden ancient city and seemed to reflect off a sharp aura. The golden ancient palaces were located on high grounds, as though they were right beside a cliff. Standing on its corner, one could see the scenery below and also in the distance. "We've arrived. You should go there now," the gatekeeper said, after which he left alone. Yi Futian shouted, "Senior, thank you." Then they stepped forward, walking along the golden, ancient path. Before them, a clean-looking young monk was cleaning the ground. Seeing Yi Futian and his friends, the monk stopped what he was doing. He put one hand vertically in front of his chest and bowed slightly. "Are you the newcomers, Yi Futian? Yu Sheng and the others?" "Yes." Yi Futian greeted back, "Senior, it's nice to meet you. My name is Qijia. Uncle has asked me to wait for you here. You've finally arrived," the monk said, smiling. "Follow me. I'll show you your rooms." "Sure." Yi Futian and his friends followed him. On their way, Yi Futian asked curiously, "Senior Qijia, you look so young. When did you enter the palace?" "Last year," the monk replied. "Wait. Doesn't the Holy Ji Palace admit disciples once every 3 years? How did you enter last year?" Yi Futian asked. "That's only for the entire barren state. If someone recommends you, you can enter directly after passing the assessment set by the 6 pavilions." Qijia smiled. "The assessment that is held once every 3 years is a grand occasion in the barren state. So he can calculate the potentials and talents of his disciples?" Yi Futian's eyes sparkled. Astrologer was not an unfamiliar name to Yi Futian. Minister Zhuo was an astrologer as well. However, astrologers often had short lives as they would reveal secrets they were not supposed to. Yi Futian did not expect there to be such a powerful astrologer in the Holy Ji Palace. Yes, but not everyone wants to get tested. Astrologers are not all powerful, and their measures are also estimates, not definite. Moreover, the Lord of Wanxiang Pavilion rarely calculates the destiny of anyone. "I heard that after he does that last time, he has been secluding until now," Qijia said. Thinking about Minister Zhuo, Yi Futian could also understand this. Astrologers would always carefully conceal their abilities. "Junior, do you know whose destiny he calculated last time?" Qijia asked, smiling. "No." Yi Futian shook his head. "Make a guess?" Qijia gave a meaningful smile. "Qijia, go back," someone suddenly said in the distance. Qijia immediately put his hands together and his face turned extremely solemn. Turning around, he bowed at the incoming person and said, "Yes, uncle. I'm only explaining to them the rules of the palace. I'll leave now." Then he left the group, leaving Yi Futian speechless. Qijia's change was really quick. "Bai Luli." Qijia secretly transmitted his voice to Yi Futian as he walked into the distance. Yi Futian's eyes sparkled. The Lord of Wanxiang Pavilion had calculated the destiny of Bai Luli before, so what was the result? "So you're here." King Kong Sage walked to Yi Futian. "Senior," Yi Futian greeted. "You and Yu Shang are disciples of my brother. So just call me uncle," King Kong Sage said. "Uncle. Good. Although you have your own masters, anyone who teaches you can also be called your master. When you see the Lord next time, you may call him master. Of course, if you're really unwilling, he will not force you." King Kong Sage looked at Yi Shaoshi and Yuan Zhan. "As for you two, in the future I'll be teaching you. Of course, in the Holy Ji Palace, most of the time you'll be relying on yourselves. There are plenty of resources around here." "I understand." Everyone nodded. "Qijia has told you the necessary things, right?" King Kong Sage asked. "Yes, Senior Qijia has told us that," Yi Futian replied. "Great. In this case, I'll not say anything extra. From now on, you'll be disciples of Battle Sage Palace. Usually, you can do whatever you want, and nobody will place any restrictions on you. Now you can go and familiarize yourselves with the place King Kong Sage said. If you need anything, come and find me. Of course, if you're bullied in the Holy Ji Palace, don't come and look for me. That's the same for all the 6 pavilions. The people who can enter the Holy Ji Palace are all top geniuses, and you can fight as much as you please. It'll be too embarrassing to have you if you complain about being bullied. Then King Kong Sage also left the place. What a brief introduction. A strange expression appeared on Yi Futian's face. From Qi Jie and King Kong Sage's words, he could imagine how interesting his life in the palace would be in the future. Uncle Bai, Yi Futian said, smiling. He was already looking forward to his life here. Oh yeah, just now Qi Jie was talking about destiny. The person who got tested was destined to go beyond the sage plane. King Kong Sage suddenly said, after which he disappeared into the distance. Nobody knew if he said so to give Yi Futian more stress. Above the sage plane was the saint plane. Bai Luli had the potential to become a saint. Chapter 587. Yi Futian had heard from his second sister that because of Bai Luli's presence, many powerful people in the Holy Ji Palace had come to a certain consensus. Now he knew that the Lord of Wanxiang Pavilion had calculated Bai Luli's destiny, so he could roughly guess some things. Yi Futian had heard from his second sister that because of Bai Luli's presence, many powerful people in the Holy Ji Palace had come to a certain consensus. Now he knew that the Lord of Wanxiang Pavilion had calculated Bai Luli's destiny, so he could roughly guess some things. It was no wonder that Holy Sage Pavilion had chosen Bai Zhe and Zhuge Xing instead of him, the top performer for the entrance assessment. It was clearly not because of Bai Zhe. After all, everyone saw how Bai Zhe had lost to Yi Futian, and the people in the Holy Ji Palace were not blind. It was only because Bai Luli meant something extraordinary to the palace. Nevertheless, Yi Futian was somewhat puzzled. Apart from people like Bai Luli, who had displayed an unbelievable potential, everyone in the Barren Sky ranking was only strong in terms of their combat powers. Yi Futian had never heard of the existence of an actual saint. However, the top 3 schools all had divine teachings as their founder was a saint. As the best place to cultivate in the whole of the Barren state, the Holy Ji Palace certainly had divine teachings as well. There must have been saints from the palace in the past. Could it be that saints could not stay in the Barren state so they had to go to a superior region? Or perhaps was there another reason? Lulan, stay here with the condor and tidy the place up. We'll go and familiarize ourselves with the palace, Yi Futian said. Cultivators usually did not have a high demand for good accommodation. Qi Jie had also told them that most people of the 6 pavilions had gone to cultivate, and only a handful would stay in the pavilions. Yi Futian clearly wanted to see what kind of place this holy land of the Barren state looked like. All right. Lulan Xue nodded gently. I'll stay behind to help, Yi Qingxian said, smiling. Sure. Yi Futian nodded. Let's go. Then the 4 people left. They went outside Battle Sage Palace and gazed at the island city they were on. It was endless and even they could not see the edge of the island. The entire island city was a place for cultivation. The palace is so big. I don't think we can know the place well anytime soon. Where do we start? Yi Shaoshi asked. Yi Futian also felt the same way. When we came just now, didn't we see an area filled with activities? We'll go there first. When we meet other people, we can also ask about the situation of the palace, Yi Futian said. Nobody had any objections. Therefore, the 4 people stepped into the air and walked towards a certain place. After a while, Yi Futian and his friends arrived in a region filled with streets. Indeed, there were many people around. Somewhere in the place there was a stone wall with some writings on it. Many people were standing there looking at the wall. Hua Fan actually got a place in Sage Palace. Another top genius of the Holy Ji Palace managed to enter Sage Palace. A new person will definitely appear on the Barren Sky ranking in the future. I wonder who'll be kicked out of the ranking. Many people were discussing among themselves. Hua Fan was a disciple of Holy Sage Pavilion. It was written on the stone wall that he had obtained the approval of Holy Sage Pavilion to enter Sage Palace, causing many to feel emotional. Although they already knew about Hua Fan's talents long ago, he had actually gotten himself a place in Sage Palace in merely 6 years. It was still somewhat astonishing. The disciples of the Holy Ji Palace all knew what that meant. All the cultivators who had entered Sage Palace in the past had also appeared on the barren sky ranking. Many famous people could be used as examples, including the Lord of White Cloud City, the leader of the Zhuge family by Luli, and of course many powerful people of the Holy Ji Palace. When he goes to Sage Palace this time, Hua Fan will probably try to break through into the Sage Plane, someone said. Indeed. 6 years ago, Hua Fan elegantly got first place in the entrance assessment. He was honored as the most talented person in the palace after Bai Luli. After that, he started his rapid climb in the Holy Ji Palace. I didn't expect him to be able to enter Sage Palace in such a short time. I suppose Shimin Hanjiang should feel some pressure now, someone said. Shimin Hanjiang was the top performer in the assessment 3 years ago. He was honored as the rarest genius of Shimin clan in Zhongzhou City, and had taken Bai Luli as his goal. Now, Hua Fan, who had entered before him, had already obtained a chance to enter Sage Palace. Shimin Hanjiang would clearly have some thoughts on this. Shimin Hanjiang is talented, but it'll not be easy for him to enter Sage Palace. Within the cohort 3 years ago, there are people who are no weaker than him, someone commented, smiling. There were countless geniuses in the Holy Ji Palace. However, only a handful could enter Sage Palace. I just received news that the top performer in this cohort had already entered the palace not long ago, someone said. The top performers of the entrance assessments would always receive much attention. The disciples in this cohort will come here one after another. It seems like the place will get more lively for quite a while. I heard that there was a major conflict between Yi Futian and Bai Zhe. In the arena, he almost disabled Bai Zhe and humiliated him badly. The Holy Ji Palace will surely be busy in the future. I heard of that as well. It said that when Bai Zhe was chatting, he publicly invited Hua Jieyu to enter the palace with him, ignoring Yi Futian's presence. He did not expect himself to meet a tough opponent this time and caused Yi Futian's rage. However, it's indeed embarrassing for Bai Zhe this time. His brother is so unparalleled and outstanding, but he was humiliated openly in the assessment. I'm sure he really wants to kill Yi Futian now. This time a few people did not manage to enter the Holy Ji Palace, but I heard that there are also quite a few good ones. Yi Futian, Yushang, Suke, Divine Spiritual Sorcerer Hua Jieyu, and many others are all not bad. Although Bai Zhe lost, his talents are not that weak either. Is it? Suddenly, a young man with white-colored skin walked over. He looked delicate and his face was filled with a gentle smile. From his smile, one could tell that he was an extremely confident person. I think that assessment this time is only SOSO, the young man said, smiling. Everyone turned their heads and looked at the young man, interested. Someone smiled and said, Yunfeng, you entered Daozong Palace last year, becoming a disciple of Sage Daozong directly, so you did not participate in the assessment not long ago. Do ignore me, Yi Futian said, smiling as if he was very humble. This was everyone to be curious. Was he really the top performer, the person who was set to defeat Bai Zhe and Huang Zhouge? Oh yeah. I'm completely unfamiliar with the palace. What place is this? Yi Futian asked. This is the place where the law rank is. It's called the law battle area. If disciples of the Holy Ji Palace want to have a law battle, they can do it on the law battle platform not far from here. Doesn't the Holy Ji Palace prohibit fighting? Why is there a place meant for battles? Yi Futian asked curiously. It's good to have something formal, the person replied, smiling. Moreover, if someone on the law rank initiates a law battle, it'll affect the ranking. I got it. Apart from this law battle area, what other places are there? Yi Futian asked further. The region around the law battle area is known as the Law Power Zone. There are 7 intriguing secret zones which are suitable for all kinds of sorcerers to cultivate. If you go further forward, you will find the Sky-Reaching Tower. That acts as a dividing line. The Sky-Reaching Tower is a treasure of Battle Sage Palace, and can train the physical strength of martial arts cultivators. Beyond the Sky-Reaching Tower are various places meant for cultivation. You will find blessed caves, mountains and relics, and secret zones left by seniors. That region is the most extensive one and occupies half of the island city. You'll need to see that for yourself. Apart from those, The 6 pavilions here all have their own places for cultivation. Lastly, there is the relic of Sage Palace, the restricted area of the Holy Ji Palace. The person very patiently introduced these places briefly to Yi Futian. Yi Futian nodded. Thank you, senior. Don't mention it. You will get the same answer by asking anyone else. That person smiled warmly. Yi Futian believed that the vast island city was sufficient for him to grow to the level he needed. If he had the chance, he would definitely want to enter the Sage Palace. Suddenly, a loud sound erupted from the distance. Everyone raised their heads and looked at that direction, where a battle seemed to be in action. Many loud collisions could be heard. It's the law battle platform. Junior Yi, let's go and take a look? Someone asked Yi Futian, looking at him. Sure. Yi Futian nodded. Then the group left the place and walked towards the location of the battle. Soon they arrived at the law battle platform. 2 cultivators were fighting against each other on the platform at the moment, and many people were standing around them watching. Zhongli? Yi Futian's eyes sparkled. In the arena, one of the cultivators was releasing his life spirit, which was a tripod. It was precisely Zhongli who had entered the Holy Ji Palace with him. He was from the Separation Road and lost to Yuan Zhan's 9 heavenly attacks. Nevertheless, he was very strong. However, at the moment Zhongli was losing the fight. His opponent was a grade 6 noble, which was higher than him. Zhongli tenaciously defended himself for a while. In the end he was still smashed onto the ground and spat up a lot of blood. The person who had defeated Zhongli stood arrogantly in the sky. Looking at Zhongli from above, he said, "Only geniuses can enter the Holy Ji Palace, and the same goes to you as well. However, when you're here you need to understand that you should keep a low profile as a newcomer." Zhongli's face darkened. He did not expect himself to be humiliated like this in the first battle here. A strange expression appeared on Yi Futian's face. Newcomer? Low profile? In any case, he had always been keeping a low profile. Yi Futian. Suddenly, a person who had watched the assessment battles looked at Yi Futian. And Yusheng Yuanzhan. They're all in the top 10 in the assessment this year. Many people turned around and stared at Yi Futian and his friends. Top performer of the assessment. A grade 9 noble in the law rank. Many people smiled. One person even asked, "Top performer, did you come to the law battle platform to have a fight?" Passing by only, Yi Futian replied, smiling. "Since you're here, why don't you try? I want to see how strong the top performer this time is," the person who had just defeated Zhongli said. His name was Wang Yu. 3 years ago, he was only selected by the Thousand Holy Island due to his low level. However, he managed to enter the core island with his talents. "No. I was only lucky to be the top performer. Clearly, I'm no match for you," Yi Futian said, smiling. "Let's go." Then the group started walking away from the place. Yi Futian had come to the Holy Ji Palace to cultivate and become strong quickly. It would be best to avoid any battle. Since you're in the law rank, you don't have to be so humble. Wang Yu released his aura which enveloped Yi Futian. He was still unwilling to give up. "Now," Yi Futian said softly. Then he suddenly turned around. Enveloped with the wind, the 4 people charged towards Wang Yu directly, causing everyone around to be stunned. In the next instant, vines grew out from Yi Xiaoshi's body wildly. Yuan Zhan slapped out, while Yusheng struck his god-slaying halberd forward directly. On the other hand, the polearm of divine destruction appeared in Yi Futian's hands, and he attacked Wang Yu from midair with an astonishing force. This sudden change caused everyone to be flabbergasted, including Wang Yu. He used all his powers to defend, but many attacks landed onto his body at the same time. Bang bang bang. Many loud bangs were heard. Then everyone saw Wang Yu's body collapse on the ground directly as he spat out blood. "Let's go." Before anyone could react, Yi Futian and his friends had already left and gone up into the sky. Air. Many people were bewildered. Yi Futian was humble just a second ago, but he suddenly attacked Wang Yu with his strongest move. "That's despicable," someone said emotionlessly. "Was this the top performance in this batch?" Zhongli got up from the ground and said coldly, "A grade 6 noble just challenged a grade 9 noble, and you're saying that he's despicable?" Indeed, he was still too simple-minded. He should have been quick and ruthless just like Yi Futian. It's still so boring in the inn. Yunfeng smiled and shook his head. He thought that Yi Futian, a genius who had just entered the law rank, would agree to the fight. Little did he expect something like this to happen. Therefore he was somewhat disappointed. Then he also left the place. On the other, Yi Futian, who was flying in the air, cursed in his mind, "Idiot." Chapter 588. The region around the law battle area was known as the Law Power Zone. Yi Futian spent one day walking around in the Law Power Zone, and he was somewhat shocked. The Holy Ji Palace was indeed a holy land for cultivators. On the left side of the Law Power Zone there were the Ice Zone and the Flame Zone, while on the right were the Earth Zone and the Lightning Zone. In the region at the back, one could find an extraordinary storm, as well as countless ancient woods. Among the 7 powers, only the element of metal seemed to be missing. However, the sky-reaching tower at the front, which was honored as the best place for martial arts cultivators, was glittering in golden radiance and contained metal elemental powers. The region around the law battle area was known as the Law Power Zone. Yi Futian spent one day walking around in the Law Power Zone, and he was somewhat shocked. The Holy Ji Palace was indeed a holy land for cultivators. On the left side of the Law Power Zone there were the Ice Zone and the Flame Zone, while on the right were the Earth Zone and the Lightning Zone. In the region at the back, one could find an extraordinary storm, as well as countless ancient woods. Among the 7 powers, only the element of metal seemed to be missing. However, the sky-reaching tower at the front, which was honored as the best place for martial arts cultivators, was glittering in golden radiance and contained metal elemental powers. That was the most crowded place. Of course, Yi Futian only visited the exterior of each zone to look at the situation inside. In the end, Yu Shang, Yuanzhan, and Yi Shaoshi went to the sky-reaching tower, while Yi Futian went to the left side of the Law Power Zone alone. Such a wonderful place was very useful for him as a noble plane cultivator. He would definitely not miss out on the opportunity. Yi Futian went into the Ice Zone on the left side of the Law Power Zone. The entire place was white, covered completely in ice. It looked desolate and freezing cold. Yi Futian strolled on the ice and stared at the frozen ancient tree ahead, which looked like an ice statue. Even with Yi Futian's level, he could still feel an intense wave of coldness. However, he did not stop and continued walking deeper. This was clearly a place for cultivators with ice elemental powers. The coldness grew rapidly in intensity. The frozen world, along with the silver crystal-like tree, presented a different kind of beauty. From the icy ground, many traces of white chilly gas were being released. The cold gas could actually seep into Yi Futian's body, and it seemed to turn into a strange kind of ice elemental spiritual qi. They spread across his body bit by bit, causing his blood to flow slowly. Gradually, Yi Futian's pace and even his breathing slowed down. Unknowingly, Yi Futian felt that his thoughts and breathing were becoming slower as the coldness intruded into his body. Yi Futian closed his eyes. Sensing the world around him with his spiritual energy, he discovered that even the flow of spiritual qi was diminishing. The entire world had slowed down. This was an effect caused by ice will. Apart from being slower, Yi Futian's body was also covered with frost. If this was to continue, he would be frozen here forever. In this barren, icy world, Yi Futian would very occasionally see other cultivators. They would normally sit down at a certain place, feeling the artistic conception in silence. After a cultivator reached the noble plane, absorbing spiritual qi and meditating would only allow his spiritual energy to grow by a limited amount. In this way, his rate of cultivation would be extremely slowly. To hasten it, he would need to focus on understanding noble will. Noble will of any element would do the job. Noble will was something that only noble plane cultivators could fully understand. It involved both spiritual energy and spiritual qi. Even the world tree was covered in frost as it rustled, producing a desolate and cold sight. At the moment, Yi Futian was somewhat shocked. He actually managed to do it. After he entered the noble plane and understood more about noble will, the world tree could actually absorb the will of various elements. Of course, this was because the coldness was seeping into his body slowly. If someone attacked him by casting a powerful ice elemental spell, He would be frozen to death before being able to absorb anything. In the blink of an eye, 3 more days passed. Yi Futian's body was already covered in white frost. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and even his pupils seemed to have been turned silver. Shaking his body, the frost on his body dropped to the ground. Then, he stood up and walked slowly towards the lake of coldness in the valley. Accompanied by many rustlings, emerald green stems and leaves extended from his body, absorbing the icy currents flowing past him. Finally, he reached the edge of the lake of coldness. His body was covered by frost which was then absorbed by his life spirit, and the whole process kept repeating itself. He knew well that without the world tree, he would not have made it this far, and would have not dared to try it in the first place. It's not water. It's an icy lake condensed from the icy currents. What's down there? Yi Futian muttered to himself. The stems of the world tree continued to extend up from his body and entered the lake of coldness, going deeper. Yi Futian also walked out and submerged into the lake slowly. His world tree spirit enveloped his body, and he did not dare to be even slightly careless. In the lake of coldness, Yi Futian continued his way down with his entire body covered in his life spirit. As he went deeper, he finally saw what was on the bed of the lake of coldness. It was a crystalline silvery snow lotus which was so clean that not even the slightest amount of dirt could be found on it. The petals of the lotus were also silver in color. As it swayed in the lake slowly, icy currents were released from it. This place is frozen and contains an endless amount of coldness. Is this only because of the lotus below? Yi Futian was astonished. What lotus was this? Although he knew that there were many rare things in the world, this was the first time he saw such a powerful snow lotus. The lotus had given birth to an entire world, one that was covered by intense coldness. Yi Futian's body was covered by his life spirit, but he could still feel how terrifying the icy currents trying to invade his body were. He did not want to stay any longer. What's that? Suddenly, Yi Futian actually saw an ice statue beside the lotus. Someone was frozen inside. Was this someone from the Holy Ji Palace who had died by entering the relic with brute force? The vines of the world tree swept out and grabbed the ice statue. Then Yi Futian ascended from the bed of the lake. He did not want the frozen body to remain there forever. Very soon, Yi Futian was out of the lake of coldness again. He brought the ice statue and left the valley, returning to the top. Then he put the statue down. Yi Futian looked at the ice statue as his glance turned into a long stare. The person inside the transparent ice statue was actually an extremely charming lady. Moreover, she was wearing only simple undergarments. She looked sexy and exquisite, and her skin was white and flawless, as if it had merged with the ice. That's so unfortunate, Yi Futian muttered to himself. With such an outstanding appearance, she must have been a genius from a top family or force. She actually died cultivating in the Holy Ji Palace. Yi Futian put his hand on the ice and his fire elemental power slowly melted it away. Very quickly, a flawless body was lying on the ground. Her skin was as pure as snow, as if she had merged with the ground. Perhaps because she had been frozen, no injuries could be observed on her body and her skin looked extremely delicate. Even if you want to cultivate, why did you have to dress like this and enter the lake? Yi Futian muttered to himself, not knowing what to do. If he just carried the corpse of the beauty outside, there would certainly be a huge misunderstanding. However, it was also bad to just leave her here. Please forgive me. After withdrawing his life spirit, Yi Futian took out a piece of cloth and put it around the lady's body. He could not care if there would be a misunderstanding. Who asked him to be so kind? Then he picked the body up off the ground. He could feel that the lady's skin was still soft and smooth, just like that of an ordinary person's. Lifting his foot, Yi Futian walked towards the outside. In the silvery world, Yi Futian carried the body towards the entrance. Suddenly someone asked, "Is it comfortable?" "Yep." Yi Futian nodded subconsciously. "Wait." Yi Futian staggered and immediately looked at the person he was carrying. He saw a pair of clear and pretty eyes staring at him, as cold as the freezing world. Then he felt her breath and heartbeat. A corpse coming to life. Yi Futian immediately withdrew his hands. Accompanied by a soft thud, the lady fell to the ground. However, she did not seem to have felt anything and was still staring coldly at Yi Futian. Then she got up from the ground. With her back facing Yi Futian, she took out her clothes from her storage ring and covered her wonderful body up with a silver-colored windbreaker. When she turned around, Yi Futian raised both of his hands up and said in a shaking voice, "It's just a misunderstanding." He really wanted to curse. Was this lady mad? She ran to the lake of coldness to be frozen, and also had not worn enough clothing. The lady was still staring at him. Then she reached out her hand. Immediately, Yi Futian was slowly frozen as an extremely intense coldness seeped into his body. Yi Futian shivered. The lady was at the peak of the noble plane. Air. Yi Futian wanted to curse, but he still smiled and explained, "It's really a misunderstanding." The coldness continued to invade his body. Stomping on the ground, Yi Futian jumped into the air immediately, his speed as fast as lightning. However, an enormous ice wall suddenly appeared on the path before him. At the same time, his body was almost frozen and he could hardly move. "Listen to my explanation," Yi Futian shouted. How unlucky did he have to be? Chapter 589. Yun Shuixing studied in the Daozong Palace and was a student of Sage Daozong. Her ice elemental powers were intriguing. She had been to the world of ice many times and was often seen training there. As her plane grew, she was able to step into the lake of coldness to experience the true will of ice in order to further her training. She immersed herself within the lake of coldness, having her skin touch the cold currents directly to become one with the true will of ice. It was as if she had always been a part of the ice. Yun Shuixing studied in the Daozong Palace and was a student of Sage Daozong. Her ice elemental powers were intriguing. She had been to the world of ice many times and was often seen training there. As her plane grew, she was able to step into the lake of coldness to experience the true will of ice in order to further her training. She immersed herself within the lake of coldness, having her skin touch the cold currents directly to become one with the true will of ice. It was as if she had always been a part of the ice. As she was at the pinnacle of her noble plane, she needed to break into the sage plane. However, she did not expect when she awakened that not only was she unable to make a breakthrough and had not developed any further comprehension of anything, but she found herself in someone else's embrace, someone male. Yun Shuixing extended her hand, forcing streaks of cold currents into Yi Futian's body. He felt the flow of his blood and the flow of spiritual qi around him slow. That very state was the state of the place they were in. The woman's comprehension was deep, and she had already developed the ability to conjure something that resembled what the space they were in was like. Using her cold will alone, Yi Futian lifted his head and saw very pointy icicles hanging right over his head in the air. If any one of them was to fall, he would lose his head. This woman is really serious, he thought. Don't you want to know what I've done to you? Yi Futian asked loudly. Yun Shuixing halted whatever she was doing and her eyes froze. Her eyes turned ice cold as her chest heaved. He actually did something to me? Seeing her stop, Yi Futian explained quickly, I saw you being sealed inside the lake of coldness, and thought you might have accidentally fallen into it. I fished you out of mercy, and is this how you would return my kind act? I was training. Yun Shuixing was so cold that it sent shivers down Yi Futian's spine. You get naked when you train? Yi Futian asked. Go to hell. The icicles hanging over Yi Futian's head fell, and his body felt as if it was paralyzed by the power of cold, making movement nearly impossible. The palace forbids the killing of one's own, and you are about to violate that rule, Yi Futian shouted. Indeed, one should really never judge a book by its cover. I wouldn't have thought that someone this beautiful could get this vicious. I wouldn't have saved her otherwise. No one else is here to see anything, Yun Shuixing replied coldly. Dazzling lights glimmered about Yi Futian's body. The encroaching cold was absorbed bit by bit as they talked. A shimmering light blasted, and the polearm of divine destruction appeared. The implement blasted the icicles above him like a bolt of lightning, and a flying boat appeared beneath his legs at an incredible speed. The icicles were all destroyed by the polearm, and rumbling noises reverberated. Yi Futian vanished from where he was. Yun Shuixing was stunned and her expression turned even colder. That slimy asshole. She burst forward and chased after Yi Futian. Yi Futian took to the sky, attempting to leave the ice zone and make for the law battle area. There will be more people outside, and that wretch wouldn't dare do anything then. Just what did I do to her to have her come for my neck? Women are vicious creatures indeed. It was fortunate that Headmaster Chun Yuan had given the flying boat to him, a device of unparalleled speed. However, Yun Shuixing's level was far higher than his. Against someone at the pinnacle of the noble plane, he was unable to shake her off, even running away using a ritual implement. If she were to get any closer, he would fall under the influence of her cold spells. The chase took place at a neck-breaking speed as they gradually reached the edge of the icy cold world. Yi Futian continued running as they went outside the area, and he found the woman continuing the chase, but she was unable to close in on him. I was just trying to be nice. Do you have to go this far? Yi Futian shouted at the silhouette behind him. Cold spears zipped at him. Yi Futian was startled enough that he turned around and continued steering the flying boat forward in an arc. He was irritated. He was able to understand the annoyance that the woman behind him was going through. While it was all just a misunderstanding, awakening to see herself in the embrace of a stranger, who was a man, was still something no woman would want to experience. He explained what happened and she continued to come for his neck, and that was too much for him. Both zipped past in the air and finally made it into the law battle area. Yi Futian sighed in relief. That woman won't dare do anything now that we're here. Two people below were puzzled. Is that Yun Shuixing of Daozong Palace? Yun Shuixing was known for her diligence in training, and she was hardly seen anywhere. She had immense talent and was a stunning beauty. Her high rank in the law rank made her a famous figure in the Holy Ji Palace, and many knew her. Who is she going after? Someone looked in the direction of the chase. That's Yi Futian, the one who ranked first in the battle to enter the Holy Ji Palace. Someone else answered, and many flocked to see what was going on. Just how did that newbie manage to get on Yun Shuixing's bad side? Yi Futian continued forward. The golden sky-reaching tower was seen right before him, and there were many disciples of the palace about. Many saw the two silhouettes in a chase in the air, and some came before Yi Futian trying to block his way. Yi Futian frowned and stopped at a certain distance between him and the woman chasing him. He had never seemed to have offended anyone, so he was puzzled as to why there were people blocking his way. Don't you think you've gone too far, girl? Yi Futian stopped, turning around to address Yun Shuixing coming at him. The air around them turned incredibly cold in an instant. The current seemed to slow down and the cold encroached yet again, making Yi Futian feel as if he was still within the ice zone. Yun Shuixing scanned the ones around him without saying a word. What did he do to offend Sister Yun? One of the people who went to block Yi Futian off asked Yun Shuixing. Yi Futian had only realized then that it was not that he had done anything to offend the other guy, but that the other guy wanted to somehow show off to the woman chasing him. Yun Shuixing did not answer, as she was simply unable to. She looked at Yi Futian with cold eyes and said, "Come with me. Go with you." Yi Futian eyed Yun Shuixing, not knowing what she was up to. "Are you trying to make me take responsibility for you or something?" Yi Futian asked with a smirk. Everyone within earshot froze at the question. Taking responsibility for Yun Shuixing? Yun Shuixing was stunned herself. Her expression was incredibly cold and many murmured below them. It was only when Yi Futian's name was spoken that they knew that the young man was the number one newbie, and the one who ranked last on the law rank. It was also said that the young man was incredibly shameless. He went about ambushing Wang Yu despite being new to the place, having no consideration for status or face whatsoever. Just what did this guy do? Yun Shuixing? Silence. Yun Shuixing said coldly, "Come with you and I will not kill you." Kill? Many got even more intrigued specifically about what Yi Futian did. "Sister Yun, what has he done to you?" a girl asked again. She looked incredibly stunning and carried herself with an air of elegance. She also studied in Daozong Palace and shared an amicable bond with Yun Shuixing. Suspecting that Yi Futian had actually done something to her friend, she looked at Yi Futian with a tinge of hostility. "Nothing," Yun Shuixing answered lightly while keeping her eyes on Yi Futian. "Just go. I'll just pretend it never happened." And you and I never meet each other, Yi Futian said, looking at Yun Shuisheng. Yun Shuisheng responded by taking a step forward, her cold aura increasingly intense, and her spells went on to encompass Yi Futian. Many saw that he was about to be thoroughly frozen in mere seconds. The freezing power was extremely intense, so much so that not even flames would have been able to do anything to withstand it. He felt his body being encroached and his blood about to freeze. If you won't stop what you're doing, I'll tell everyone what happened between us, Yi Futian said loudly, and everything seemed to freeze instantly. Everyone lifted their heads to look at Yi Futian. What happened between the two of them? What did he do to Yun Shuisheng? As expected, Yun Shuisheng stopped what she was doing. Despite her temperance, it was not hard to see that she was still infuriated, and her eyes were still fixed on Yi Futian. Nothing happened between us, Yun Shuisheng said coldly. If that is actually true, tell what happened and let everyone judge for themselves, Yi Futian added. Yi Futian, Yun Shuisheng uttered his name coldly. She came to know his name from the chatter taking place below her. I'll remember you. Yun Shuisheng glared at Yi Futian before turning around and leaving. The cold aura dispersed and Yi Futian sighed. However, the relief did nothing to ease his frustration. His kindness was viciously returned. He had become a big, glowing target. Worse still, he had been threatened. I sure as hell don't think anyone would be alright with something like that happening to them, he thought. Nice body you have there, Yi Futian quipped as he saw Yun Shuisheng walking away. Yun Shuisheng halted briefly and shuddered before leaving the scene. She did not get herself entangled further, as she knew he would actually make good on his words. Many present were infuriated by Yi Futian's words. What do you mean, nice body? Why had Sister Yun chased him all over the place like that yet did not end up daring to lift a finger against him? Their conversation piqued the interests of many. Just what did that bastard do to Yun Shuisheng? Many disciples of Daozong Palace revered and idolized the cool beauty who ranked high on the law rank, and they were immensely irked at Yi Futian making a pass at her. Chapter 590. Yi Futian looked at the girl before him. Yun Shuisheng might have gone looking for trouble for some solid reason, but the girl before him was simply sticking her nose in places she should not have. Yi Futian looked at the girl before him. Yun Shuisheng might have gone looking for trouble for some solid reason, but the girl before him was simply sticking her nose in places she should not have. Brother Qijia was right. There were hardly any rules in the palace. He knew one cold hard fact about the palace: might makes right. He recalled the words of his senior and found that it was all the same no matter where he ended up. Most of the time, one's fist was more compelling than one's words. It was a pity that he was a newbie to the place, and everyone else was a part of the Holy Ji Palace before he was. Most of them advanced from the 1,000 Holy Islands. There were also people who were selected from examinations 3 years and 6 years ago. It was only natural that most people had more training than he did, especially those who were there years before him. The levels of those people were way above his, one of them being Yun Shuisheng, who was at the top of the noble plane. As such, the so-called righteous indignation that they seemed to be going through then was simply a mask for something far simpler: bullying the new guy. It was especially so given that the new guy was the one who ranked first in the entrance examination held earlier, who got ranked on the law rank as soon as he got in. It was only natural that one such figure would attract attention. Yi Futian smiled and said, I'm new to the palace, and in terms of planes and levels, everyone present would be my senior. Your so-called teaching me how you do things here is exactly what I see before me. He cast his glance onto everyone present as he said. Everyone knew what his seemingly polite words actually meant. He was criticizing them for bullying. However, there was hardly anyone moved by his words. Someone replied with a smirk, Well, are you telling me that you have forgotten what you did, ambushing others and all back at the law battle tablet? It's only natural that we be wary. So, that is to say that you seniors find it imperative to gang up on the new guy, which would be me, then? Yi Futian asked with a smile. Gang up? The cross-armed youth looked at Yi Futian and answered, We know what you are trying to pull here, but you think too highly of yourself. Pick any one of us here and fight. If you manage to win, we'll let you off. How about that? Many looked on with interest. While they saw Yi Futian to be some vile creature, they were nonetheless curious of what he was capable of, and this proved to be a good chance to see what he was made of. The fight would also have the added benefit of teaching him a lesson and having him know his place. And you would be speaking for? Yi Futian asked as he looked about. The youth was dumbfounded. He was indeed incapable of speaking for anyone present, yet the fact remained that many shared his thoughts at the moment. The girl who talked about teaching Yi Futian a lesson opened her mouth as Yi Futian kept his gaze on the students around him. Your pick. And what is your plane? Yi Futian nodded and asked the girl. Grade 5 noble, the girl answered coldly. I make it a point of not bullying women, Yi Futian said crisply, rendering everyone around stunned. This guy really has no shame indeed. Not bullying women? Then what was he doing with Yun Shuisheng? It was unexpected for many that he was able to find such a grand excuse to mask his cowardice. There were probably no predecessors who entered the palace as a champion and were as shameless as Yi Futian. He was indeed a trailblazer in certain ways. Hua Fan of the Holy Sage Pavilion was a genius like no other, and even Shimin Hanjiang from 3 years ago was just as dashing. The one before their eyes, however, despite having incredibly good looks, was a despicable one like no other. It was a pity that someone so vile was so handsome. And you, senior, what is your plane? Yi Futian looked at the crossed-armed youth before him. Grade 6 noble. The youth smirked as he answered. I will fight you then. Yi Futian added, as my plane was still low. May I be allowed to use a ritual implement? Beware of traps, the girl beside the youth reminded. That is one vile creature, and you can't just fall into his trap. Furthermore, despite being despicable and shameless, his might as the champion to enter the palace was not just for show, and he is definitely powerful to a certain extent. He needs prowess equal to a grade 7 noble plane to be a champion. If he is allowed the use of sage ritual implements, he will be difficult to deal with when he gets serious. They had already given Yi Futian a chance to challenge who he fancied, and they were not about to say yes to such a request. Of course, you should be allowed to use a ritual implement yourself, Yi Futian said plainly after sparing a glance at the girl. All right then. The youth smiled. No member of the Holy Ji Palace was someone common who could be found just anywhere. It was a given that the youth packed something tremendous himself, and Yi Futian had no way of getting an edge using such tricks. I thank you for your generosity. May I know your name? If I were to lose, I'd at least like to know to whom I lost, Yi Futian added. The name's Yin Xian, the youth said. Aren't you talking a little too much? I look forward to learn from you, senior, Yi Futian said as he cupped his hands. He took out the polearm of divine destruction without saying another word, and he became clad in starlight. That is a pretentious one. Many looked at Yi Futian, who behaved politely despite obviously feeling very irritated inside. He had smiled broadly and addressed the other party as senior. They were rather impressed at the thickness of his hide. Make your move, Yin Xian said plainly. Terrifying thunderous power blazed in a mere instant. Their surroundings trembled instantaneously, as Yin Xian seemed to have become another person. A shadow of a tremendously huge thunder god appeared behind him. The shadow carried a thunder hammer that seemed to be able to crush the earth beneath them with one swing. Yin Xian, the proud son of the top force of Zhongzhou City, the Lightning Court. He had only broken through noble plane about 3 years ago, and had earned the favor of the elders in the Daozong Palace of the Holy Ji Palace shortly after. He was offered a place in the palace. Now 3 years had passed and his training progressed to grade 6 noble plane. He had acquired impeccable control of the power of lightning will. While Yin Xian was eager to teach the newbie who was the champion of the law battle, he did not allow himself to underestimate his opponent. Chapter 591. The sky-reaching tower glittered golden lights. Its golden dazzling sheen flowed from top to bottom and spread out to all corners. Yi Futian was able to feel the immense pressure bearing down on him by simply standing at the edge of its vicinity. It was especially so when the golden sheen passed by his body. It felt as if magnificent energies were wandering about him. The sky-reaching tower glittered golden lights. Its golden dazzling sheen flowed from top to bottom and spread out to all corners. Futian was able to feel the immense pressure bearing down on him by simply standing at the edge of its vicinity. It was especially so when the golden sheen passed by his body. It felt as if magnificent energies were wandering about him. The law power zone consisted of ruins bearing powers of 6 elements, except for metal element. It was thought that metal element worked in synchronization with the tower, allowing one to develop comprehension of metal elemental will and temper one's body just by being around it. The base of the tower was open all day long. Every single door felt as if it were a cavern. A figure was seen standing right before Futian, who smiled as Futian walked in the tower's direction. "Brother Qijie," Futian called. "You are quite something yourself, little brother. You'll be famous here soon enough," Qijie said with a smile, thinking that Futian was indeed the champion of the law battles, bullying his seniors as soon as he made himself comfortable with the place and all. He used to hear that newbies were the ones being bullied. "I'm afraid the correct word would be notorious instead." Futian shrugged, not caring whether he was famous or notorious. He was new to the palace and his plane was low. He joked around and used tricks to save himself from trouble. While many were dissatisfied as to how he behaved in his first ever battle inside the palace, there was hardly anyone who bothered trying to understand what he was going through. Having a noble at the top of her plane out for his head, and then being surrounded by a group of middle-grade nobles was no pleasant experience. He did not find it feasible to just protest the indignation he suffered and fight his way out to show how noble he was as a person. If he had lost that very first battle, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Despite having won his battle in the palace, he was humiliated all the same. His title as the champion was thought to be a joke of some kind. If whacking each and every one of those who bullied him had been a doable solution, he would not have bothered saying much to them. What mattered most to him at the moment was that he train and improve his powers. Reputation was hardly a concern in comparison. During his travels on the Holy Road and the battles for entry into the Holy Ji Palace, he had endured all sorts of humiliation. However, no one was able to say or do anything once he came out on top. If there were to be a day where he ranked first on the law rank and gained entry to the Sage Palace, there would be no place for anyone to doubt his abilities. "Your reputation will improve when you are able to beat all of them." Qijie smiled and added, "Oh right, that girl back then was Xiang Jiqin, a student of Sage Daozong. She has a high status, a princess of the Xiang Kingdom who emerged from State Road. Isn't she pretty?" Futian frowned at Qijie. "Is this guy really a monk? Poison-coated with sugar, I'd say. I have no care for external beauty anyway," Futian said plainly. While Xiang Jiqin was indeed a beauty, he found her domineering personality repulsive. "You will be good friends with the Buddha, little brother," Qijie said with a smile. "So what are you doing here, senior?" Futian stepped into the tower. Intense and terrifying pressure was felt welling up from below. Futian lifted his head to look at the top side of the tower while he was inside. There were 18 floors, and alcoves were found at the edge of every single floor. Many were seen sitting inside to train. The ones who are here most often are the people from the Battle Sage Palace, as this tower allows them to temper their physical bodies to further their martial arts, while at the same time train to develop their spiritual energies. There are 18 floors to the tower. How about you try and see how many floors you can go up? Qijie elaborated. "Will do." Futian nodded. Yushang Yishaosher and Yuan Zhan were all training on the floors above. "Is the pressure at the top floor the strongest?" he asked. "Indeed. You'll understand once you've experienced it yourself. Students of the Battle Sage Palace are all required to make it to the 18th floor before their teachers impart arts of the highest level for tempering their bodies," Qijie explained. "Understood, brother Qijie. I'll go train now." Futian went straight for the first floor and found an empty spot. He sat down and within mere moments, golden sheen slithered about his body. He came to feel as if he was shouldering a tower and felt overwhelmed. The golden sheen seemed to pack fearsome penetration powers, hitting his body and making him feel as if he was being beaten up. The tremendous pressure permeated every inch of his body, making him feel as if he was being squeezed all over. I didn't expect the pressure of the very first floor to be this strong, Yi Futian murmured to himself. After experiencing the pressure for some time, he went to the second floor, then the third, fourth, and so on. When he reached the seventh floor, he was able to feel terrifying forces bearing not just on his body, but also his mind. That feeling was indescribable. It was as if his very soul was being pressed down upon. Endless lights poured down, tearing away at both his body and soul. Within brief moments, Yi Futian felt as if he was riddled in holes, his muscles torn all over, and his bones shattered completely. He was able to endure the pain for 1 hour before he had to leave the seventh floor. His body felt as if it no longer belonged to him, as if his will was forcefully torn away from his body. I can't believe Yu Shang actually made it to the 9th floor. Yi Futian looked up and saw both Yi Shaoshi and Yuan Zhan at the 8th floor, but they had been training there for some time which Yi Futian had been spending in that world of ice. After taking some rest, Yi Futian felt that his body was ready again. He then went up to the 7th floor, acclimatizing himself to the pressure. He felt as if something was calling out to him from within, yet at other times, shimmering lights permeating his body from top to bottom. It was like he was shouldering a tower. If one's body was weak, one could not withstand such pressure, and the same could be said if one's will was weak as well. After some time, a figure approached Yi Futian and said plainly, "Are you that champion who beat Yan Xine with one whack with the staff?" Just luck, and mostly thanks to the power of the ritual implement. Hardly worth mentioning. Yi Futian opened his eyes. The one before him was dumbfounded. It was rumored that Yi Futian was a vile creature, yet he behaved completely otherwise instead. Before the figure was able to say anything further, Yi Futian added, "I admit defeat." Shay. The figure stared at him stunned, before shaking their head and leaving with a smile. This is boring indeed. Throughout the days Yi Futian spent training in the tower, there were several people who came looking for him. He replied to them the same way he did the first person he spoke to in the tower. Yi Futian was no longer seen in the tower after a while, as he went to the law power zone. It was as he expected. The reputation of the champion was not good within the palace. Contrary to his reputation, however, his rank on the law rank rose instead. He was then ranked 97th, right behind Yun Feng. Daozong Palace, the Holy Ji Palace. Many students came before the majestic ancient temple. The proud students of the Daozong Palace all stopped training and returned to the palace itself. Sage Daozong personally lecturing that day to answer questions of the ones studying in the Daozong Palace and to impart ways to train. It was a rare opportunity, something that only happened several times a year. It was only natural for the students of Daozong Palace to cherish such rare events. Furthermore, Sage Daozong was the one to give the most number of lectures out of all the lords from the 6 palaces and pavilions, and the students of Daozong Palace were also the most numerous. Hundreds flocked to the majestic ancient temple, and things looked marvelous. There were also students from other pavilions and palaces to join the lecture. Daozong Palace did not mind their presence, as all members of the Holy Ji Palace were welcomed. There were 2 figures seated on their cushions silently. The 2 came earlier and as such, were able to sit at the fore. Most looked at them with eyes of adoration. Those 2 were none other than the new students of the Daozong Palace, Hua Jieyu and Phoenix. Both figures shared 2 things in common. Both were hard-working in their training and both looked stunning. While Daozong Palace had always been known for their number of beauties, there were not many. There were 4 top-class beauties among the ones personally taught by the palace lord. Other than the 2 newbies, there were also Yun Shuixing and Xiang Jiqin. Of the 4, Hua Jieyu was most deemed the most perfect, for behaving like a fairy and seeming to embody all that was beautiful about the world. Phoenix exuded extraordinary elegance as if she was not of this world, clean and free from all that was unsightly about the world. Yun Shuixing was the cool beauty of the palace, and also one deemed to be worshipped. Xiang Jiqin was beautiful and elegant, with looks on par with the other 3. Most deemed the 4 to be the most beautiful sight the Daozong Palace had to offer. As such, it was a tremendously beautiful thing for all 4 of them to be present at one place. There was also one spot flocked to by many, A figure was seen sitting there and painting earnestly, a figure named Yun Feng. He drew very slowly and spared glances at the two figures in front of him occasionally. Many surrounded him and watched the two he was drawing come to life on paper. He was only drawing their faces from the side, but it proved more than enough to tug the heartstrings of many. The painting seems to be imbued with the natural prowess of the gods, and it looks like a dream. Yun Feng's mastery of the arts is indeed impeccable, and he will become yet another famous painter one day. Yun Sheng. Rumor has it that you already have Sister Yun and Sister Xiang in your paintings. Are you adding the painting of Hua Jieyu and Phoenix to your collection as well? Someone asked with a smile from the side. They are both angels in the mortal world. If I would have them both in painting, they would become even more perfect, free from all forms of dirt from the mortal world, Yun Feng answered with a smile. He put his brush down and looked at his work, finding it satisfactory. Is that dirt you mention referring to Yi Futian? Someone else asked. Yun Feng stayed silent but seemed to have admitted to it nonetheless. Someone cast their gaze to the side. Yun Shuixing was seen there as well, looking pure and stunning. They found it hard to believe that such a woman had been defiled by Yi Futian. They came to know what Hua Jieyu looked like, and that she was indeed one of the top beauties in Daozong Palace. They were unable to believe Yi Futian would defile Sister Yun despite having one such girlfriend himself. It was only natural that students of Daozong Palace had a very low opinion of him. That guy is simply lower than trash. How can he do such a thing to Sister Yun? How could he when he has a girlfriend like Hua Jieyu? Hua Jieyu was seen standing up slowly at that very moment, before turning around and walking in Yun Feng's direction. Her eyes fell onto the painting and she asked, "Do you mind destroying it?" "How could I possibly destroy such a masterpiece?" Yun Feng answered. Hua Jieyu spared a glance at him and added, "Allow me then." She fixed her gaze on the painting. Flames jumped on the paper in mere moments, burning it to nothing. Many turned to look at Hua Jieyu. She really gives respect to no one indeed. Yun Feng was still considered famous in Daozong Palace, and his seniors were good friends with Sage Daozong himself. Do you really have to go this far? Even if you destroy it, what makes you think I wouldn't just paint another one? Yun Feng asked Hua Jieyu with a smile. I'll destroy however many you paint. Hua Jieyu looked at Yun Feng, yet her smiling eyes carried a tinge of coldness. It was obvious that she minded his actions a lot, and it displeased her immensely. Yun Feng looked at Hua Jieyu and recalled a young man he saw on the law rank. Is it because of Yi Futian? Do you really have to, little sister? Xiang Zhiqin walked in their direction and turned her eyes to Hua Jieyu. While that person has immense talent, he has little to offer in the way of propriety. He is little more than a despicable mongrel, and definitely not one to be bothered with. That has nothing to do with you. Hua Jieyu turned to look at Xiang Zhiqin, and her expression turned fierce and unwavering. Throughout the days she spent training in Daozong Palace in solace, she heard many bad things about Yi Futian. While gossip was indeed a fearful thing, one had no control over what others talked about. However, she was not about to tolerate others doing the same right in front of her, whoever they may have been. Sparks flew between the two as they locked their eyes at each other in such a sacred place. Chapter 592. Everyone at the Daozong Palace wore tense expressions on their faces. Two beauties of the Daozong Palace were actually at odds with each other over what Yi Futian had said. Everyone at the Daozong Palace wore tense expressions on their faces. Two beauties of the Daozong Palace were actually at odds with each other over what Yi Futian had said. Many were actually a little envious of Yi Futian, who had ranked first in the law battle and had garnered a bad reputation for himself. It made people somewhat jealous to see how protective Hua Jieyu was over him. But Yi Futian had also been that beast who had insulted older sister Yun. Younger sister Zhiqin only meant you well. Why act this way? Yun Feng piped up from the side, breaking the tension between the two. Xiang Zhiqin smiled snidely. Since Hua Jieyu liked Yi Futian, there was nothing she could do about it anyway. I just feel sorry for you, younger sister, Xiang Zhiqin spoke calmly. Insulting older sister Yun, launching a sneak attack during someone else's challenge. With such behavior, it's better that you take note of it in future, younger sister. Hua Jieyu looked at Xiang Zhiqin. There had been much discussion over Yi Futian in the Daozong Palace. Having paid attention to what was being said about him, Hua Jieyu was not surprised by what Xiang Zhiqin had just said. Hua Jieyu walked over to Yun Shuisheng. Looking down at her, she spoke, "Older sister Yun, I don't know what caused the misunderstanding between the two of you, but I hope you can understand how he might feel being hunted down by a senior of your cultivations and plain. If he has done anything to offend you, I apologize on his behalf and ask for your forgiveness. But I assure you, he is definitely not what you think he is, older sister." Yun Shuisheng looked up at the startlingly beautiful face. She had been training in seclusion at the cold pond all this while, and had no idea what was happening in the outside world. It was only after returning to the Daozong Palace that she learned that the man who had belittled her was actually the top disciple amongst those who had just entered the palace. Furthermore, she was shocked upon hearing that Hua Jieyu was his girlfriend, and it hit her that the events of that day might have indeed been a misunderstanding. But even if it was a misunderstanding, it was insulting to have been embraced by a man like that. That was why she had persistently pursued Yi Futian the other day. Thinking about that incident made feelings of indignation rise in her. But as Yi Futian was a disciple of the Holy Ji Palace after all, there was nothing she could really do to him anyway. Besides, Hua Jieyu was a junior of hers too. As such, Yun Shuisheng replied, "If he can make a public apology to clear the air, I'll let this incident go." "Thank you, older sister." Hua Jieyu smiled at Yun Shuisheng before her gaze turned once again to Xiang Zhiqin. As for those supposed challenges, the disciples of the Holy Ji Palace are all amazing characters in their own right. If a group of people of a high plane was to surround a grade 9 noble who had just entered the palace, demand that he entertains their challenges and smear doubt over the integrity of his conduct, then I think those people should reflect on their own behavior first. "That's enough," a calm voice rang out. The owner of the voice sat quietly on a praying mat before them. He was clothed in white robes that billowed onto the floor, with a guqin in front of him. Just the outline of his figure alone belied an incredible aura that was like none other. "You're new to the palace, younger sister, so perhaps you're not too aware of the culture here," the man said. He turned to the side and said, "Just as you've said, the disciples of the Holy Ji Palace are all amazing in their own right. That's why it isn't that much of a humiliation to lose in a normal challenge due to being of a lower plane. One can always train and participate in a rematch. In a way, this is how disciples of the palace motivate each other to train harder. Everyone who has entered the palace, even those at the top of the ranks, have all been met with similar setbacks before. Yi Futian's actions are understandable, but as the top disciple amongst the newcomers and as one whose name entered the law rank upon entering the palace, he's seen as someone special. As such, people will naturally be more critical towards whatever he does. Zhiqin was speaking out of good intentions. The man's voice was gentle, and there seemed to be a mystical quality to it that made his words especially convincing. As for Zhiqin, he continued, some of the things she said were indeed out of line. Let's not pursue this matter any further. Many of the Daozong Palace disciples were gazing at the figure. His face was turned to the side as he continued staring ahead. Since Senior has spoken, I will speak no further, Xiang Zhiqin responded. Hua Jieyu threw a glance. She was still somewhat unhappy, but she did not put up any further resistance and returned to her own seat. There was nothing she could do to change the thoughts of others, but time would reveal all. Older brother Lian really is outstanding, people commented as they looked over at the man who had spoken. That man was Lian Yuqing, a musical sorcerer who was the successor that would inherit the Guqin techniques. He was the strongest among the nobles in the Daozong Palace and was ranked 5th in the law rank. Both Lian Yuqing and Yun Shuisheng were two of the strongest nobles in the Daozong Palace. Many people knew that Lian Yuqing's goal was to catch up with Bai Luli, who was 10th in the Baron Sky ranking. As much as the law rank was nicknamed the Mini Baron Sky ranking, in reality, there was still a huge gap in the abilities of those in the different rankings. Suddenly, several people could be seen walking towards everyone from afar. Instantly, the disciples got up in a flurry and bowed. The man at the head of the party was Sage Daozong himself. He was the sole reason why hundreds of disciples had gathered here. They were all here to learn from him. Sage Daozong's knowledge was vast, and of the 6 palace lords, he was the most well-rounded. As such, many cultivators of different professions were willing to learn from him. These included people like musical sorcerers and painters, among many others. Under the guidance of Sage Daozong, they could ask him questions they had during the cultivation process and seek clarity through his answers. Completely unaware of the conflict happening within the Daozong Palace, Yi Futian was still intent on training in the law power zone of the Holy Ji Palace. A canyon lay along the southern area of the law power zone. The canyon brimmed with a frightening dark gray energy, which turned out to be a hurricane that tore apart everything within range. This area was an incredibly barren one, and it seemed as if the vast raging hurricane was in the canyon. At this very moment, a person sat cross-legged in the midst of the hurricane, allowing the roaring winds to slice across his body, tearing his top and slashing through his flesh like unforgivingly sharp blades. His body was riddled with thread-thin, bloody cuts left by the winds, and traces of wounds that had been healed over could be seen as well. Yi Futian had truly experienced the savage violence of the hurricane within this area. Wind intent at its mightiest manifested in a powerful attacking force that was like a blade, stabbing at every part of Yi Futian it could reach and harboring an intense energy that tore apart everything in its way. After a long while, Yi Futian stood up and began walking deeper into the canyon. A month later, Yi Futian appeared within the Earth area that was located in the eastern part of the Law Power Zone. 3 months after that, he set foot into the destructive lightning area, which was also in the same eastern part of the zone. Time flew by in a haze. Spring changed into summer, then into autumn, and in the blink of an eye it was the end of autumn already. The fire area was a world consumed by flames, emanating frightening destructive energy. Waves of fire currents surged towards Yi Futian and seeped into his body. The flames of this area were incredibly powerful, and the fire currents that had entered Yi Futian's body felt as though they were about to consume everything in their path. Where Yi Futian stood, all was barren and lifeless, having been destroyed by the flames. But one occasionally saw a few cultivators who had come here to train as well. This place looks like a mountain range that has been burned to ashes, Yi Futian thought to himself as he walked towards the center of the fire area. Fire currents that were even more powerful than before came rushing towards him, invading his body and even worming into Yi Futian's mind in an attempt to burn away his will. A rustling sound came from within Yi Futian's life palace. Jade-green light flowed along the surface of his body, swallowing up the fire currents that passed through his body bit by bit. Within his life palace, these flame currents shot straight for the World Tree Life Spirit and attached themselves to it in an aggressive attempt to incinerate the life spirit. Just then, a mystical voice rang out inside Yi Futian's head. There seemed to be a special magical quality to the voice as it summoned him. "What's that sound?" Yi Futian's expression changed. He continued walking, stepping through the sea of flames. A mountain lay ahead, and it seemed like the voice was coming from there. "Come over here," that same mystical voice rang out again, guiding him forward. Yi Futian gradually neared the mountain, and the power of the flames grew stronger as well. "Don't go any further if you value your life," someone warned from afar, opening their eyes to shoot Yi Futian a calm glance. Yi Futian stopped and turned to look at them, but at that moment a loud bang was heard, and the mountain seemed to have been blown apart. Yi Futian turned his gaze back to see a gigantic divine fire bird before him. That divine fire bird had 3 feet and was as dazzling as the sun itself. It was a divine bird of the sun, the 3-legged golden raven. A streak of fire current energy shot viciously towards Yi Futian. He retreated in a flash, only to feel several 3-legged golden raven shadows rush into his mind in a bid to incinerate him. Using the holy will, Yi Futian kept his will intact and retreated far away before he looked forward again. The mountain was actually a massive matrix, and it was glowing blindingly bright now. The 3-legged golden raven charged again with a roar, but it was sealed by the matrix and could not go any further. It's no wonder that these flames are so wild, given that they were generated because of this 3-legged golden raven. It would be good if I could consume a demonic beast of this level in future, Yi Futian thought to himself. It seemed like he had gotten into some sort of bad habit at the cottage. Yi Futian then thanked the person who had spoken for the reminder. The person did not reply, closing his eyes to continue training. Yi Futian was not bothered by this, and he trained here for a period of time before leaving the place. When Yi Futian returned to the sky-reaching tower once more, Yu Shang had already entered the 10th level of the tower already. Yi Futian directly entered the 9th level, and endured the incredibly mighty pressure present there. As of now, he had already broken through to a higher plane in terms of sorcery, and was nearing the threshold of the next plane in terms of martial arts. After 7 days in the 9th level of the sky-reaching tower, a cracking sound came from Yi Futian's body. A roar emanated from within his body, and something seemed to shift about him. Around Yi Futian, an even more powerful streak of martial will glowed. At this moment, Yi Futian had progressed into the 8th grade of the noble plane in terms of martial arts and sorcery. He took in a deep breath before he walked down the tower and exited. Now that Yi Futian had made a breakthrough in his cultivation and had become a grade 8 noble, he could afford to take a 2-day break. He was going to head to the Daozong Palace to see how Jieyu was doing with her own training. Cultivation really is time-consuming, so much time has actually passed. Yi Futian smiled wryly. As one transcended into the higher planes, it took longer to grow one's abilities and break into the next plane. On the way there, many people recognized Yi Futian and looked at him with some interest. This was the newbie who entered the Holy Ji Palace after emerging as the top disciple from the law battle, and had immediately raised a furor, attracting a terrible reputation for himself. He had disappeared for months after that, though it was unknown whether or not that was an intentional move to escape the rumors. And now Yi Futian was back. According to rumors, his girlfriend Hua Jieyu had gotten into a conflict with many people at the Daozong Palace, and it was all because of him. Chapter 593. Hundreds of disciples gathered at the sacred ancient temple within the Daozong Palace. Sitting on praying mats, they listened quietly to Sage Daozong as he explained the ways of cultivation. Occasionally, someone would raise a question they had. Hundreds of disciples gathered at the sacred ancient temple within the Daozong Palace. Sitting on praying mats, they listened quietly to Sage Daozong as he explained the ways of cultivation. Occasionally, someone would raise a question they had. Today was coincidentally the day that Sage Daozong gave a lecture. This was the second time this year he was doing it. By now it was the end of autumn, and there was only one season left before the year ended. As such, it was imperative that one made good use of the remaining time to train as much as they could. At the Holy Ji Palace, it was possible that someone could make a sudden debut at the end of the year and bring about great changes to the law rank. However, it seemed unlikely that anyone within this most recent batch of disciples would stir up that sort of excitement. Yi Futian was the only new disciple whose name had been entered into the law rank, and he was only 97th place within the rankings. After that, he had disappeared completely, gone off somewhere unknown to train his abilities. Yi Futian climbed the stairs to get to the temple, keeping his footsteps light so as to not disrupt the sage's lecture. He threw the crowd a glance and scanning through the hundreds of disciples present, his gaze landed on Hua Jieyu, who sat at the front. It seemed that she had been one of the earliest to come to the temple, in order to snag a front row seat. She was training hard indeed. The speakers who lectured at the Holy Ji Palace were not too bothered about disciples from other palaces coming to listen. They were generous in that they did not restrict access to the knowledge they were imparting. Yi Futian sat quietly at the back, preparing to listen quietly for a while. Though Yi Futian had been a disciple of the Holy Ji Palace for quite some time by now, he had been busy with training all this while. He was a disciple of the Battle Sage Palace, but other than the time he set foot there on his first day at the Holy Ji Palace, he had not gone back since then. Yi Futian felt a little guilty. He hadn't even gone to see that teacher of his yet, but it was good that he had come to listen to Sage Daozong give a lecture now. When cultivating, most people seek out high-level techniques and powerful spells, but they often neglect the most basic training. Sage Daozong's voice rang across the room as Yi Futian sat there, listening intently. Sage Daozong continued speaking, his voice calm, Many of the Holy Ji Palace's disciples are incredible characters in their own right. Most are ambitious, and thus intend to learn such techniques and spells. I surmise that there are some who resent me for not imparting powerful techniques and spells. And yet, he continued, the question cultivators usually neglect is, how do two cultivators of the same plane differ so much in ability? For example, disciples of the Holy Ji Palace will always be stronger than ordinary people in the outside world, but those in the law rank completely outshine ordinary disciples of the palace. Is this really a matter of how powerful the techniques and spells one knows is? Many disciples of the palace are incredible in their own right. They definitely have no problems in technique training. The sage carried on, when we started training in our youth, perhaps our seniors had us focus more on basics, like the ability to perceive spiritual chi and our elemental spiritual chi abilities. As time passes, we forget about these things. Yet even at the noble plane, what is required from us is no different from when we were at the start. Even at the same plane, different people can use the same spell to different effect. Why is this so? Someone answered him, some people have stronger spiritual will than others, so there will naturally be a difference in the power of the spell cast. That's right. The sage nodded slightly. It's the same even at the noble plane. What decides the strength of the spell is ultimately still your basics, like how much worldly spiritual chi you can activate to resonate with you and combine into a spell. And all this originates from your own mastery over spiritual energy still. A mark of being at the noble plane is possessing noble will. Spells are but spiritual will. For martial arts cultivators, it's martial will. This all sounds a little abstract. I prefer to imagine them as domains. The cultivations of a sorcerer lie within the domain of spiritual energy. The form in which your spiritual energy manifests to negotiate the worldly spiritual chi of this domain determines the strength and speed of your spell. The effects of even the simplest spell can be maximized in the hands of someone powerful enough to exercise it effectively within the domain of spiritual energy, Sage Daozong declared, and at his words, frightening energy manifested in the room. In the next moment, everyone was transported into an illusion. The world was now consumed by flames. Currents of air flowed through the space, and terrifying fireballs appeared in the sky, descending towards the earth like suns. Many people looked to the sky in shock. They felt as though their bodies were about to be burnt up. Then the suns disappeared in midair, and everything returned to normal. Was that a fireball spell? Someone asked weakly. Yes. It was a beginner fire elemental spell, the lowest level fireball spell there is, Sage Daozong replied, nodding. Even when it comes to the same fire element, everyone has a different perception of fire intent, which determines the power of their spell. So, when it comes to training, before you stubbornly focus your attention on powerful techniques and spells, find a way to build up your spiritual energy domain to the best it can be. Then you'll be able to activate stronger worldly spiritual chi for your own use during battle. That's all there is to martial arts. Many people were listening intently to Sage Daozong's words and taking them to heart. Yi Futian nodded at his words. Though the sage was talking about very simple concepts, but normally not everyone took these concepts seriously. Now that Sage Daozong had pointed these concepts out again, these people would begin to pay them more attention in the future. Back then at the cottage, his teacher had made him learn various kinds of spells and know them by heart. In a way, it was to achieve the same purpose. After you've passed this level, move on to the next one, the sage advised. Use your own perception in the different domains of spiritual will to transcend into yet another domain, and attain the power generated from a new spiritual energy domain. Then use that power to modify spells and even create stronger spells. Some top-notch spells and martial arts techniques are created from the combination of various elemental abilities, and the results are powerful. Of course, this would require cultivators of a high caliber to achieve, and this is what separates the prodigies from mere geniuses. However, there are more people out there who like things ready-made like you all. It would be nice to just take something as it is to learn, right? Many people laughed at Sage Daozong's words. Indeed, this was what the majority of the crowd was thinking, even the geniuses and the prodigies themselves. All right, we'll stop here for today, Sage Daozong concluded and stood up, looking at the audience before him. Without question he saw Yi Futian. With the sage's plane, he had been alerted to Yi Futian's presence when he arrived. With a soft chuckle, Sage Daozong turned to leave. The many disciples in the audience stood up as well. Some were discussing the lecture, internalizing what they had just learned. Every time Sage Daozong gave a lecture, it was always a fruitful learning experience, with many things to become aware of. Jieyu, Yi Futian called out to her mentally. Hua Jieyu was taken aback, before she stood up to look behind her. Upon seeing Yi Futian, a brilliant smile appeared on her face, dazzling those around her. They then saw Hua Jieyu walking quickly and lightly in that direction, pretty as a young fairy. Many eyes followed her as she walked forward, before they realized that Yi Futian was there. Some people recognized Yi Futian, and their expressions darkened. How dare Yi Futian step into the Daozong Palace? Yun Shuisheng was here, and even though Hua Jieyu had spoken up for Yi Futian the other day, he hadn't actually apologized to Yun Shuisheng yet. Why are you here at the Daozong Palace? Hua Jieyu walked up to him and stretched out her hand. Yi Futian took her dainty hand in his and whispered, I missed you. Me too. Hua Jieyu whispered back just as quietly. However, those who were intentionally eavesdropping heard their exchange. They thought about the rumors that surrounded Yi Futian, and their hearts ached even further. Yi Futian had behaved inappropriately towards older sister Yun, and now he even had the cheek to enter the Holy Ji Palace and hold Hua Jieyu's hand, acting all intimate. Oh yeah, about what you did to older sister Yun back then, do you want to apologize to her? She said she wouldn't pursue this matter any further. Hua Jieyu asked Yi Futian, remembering the previous incident. Yun Shuisheng, who was in the crowd, turned to look at Yi Futian as well. The people in between them then quickly dispersed, allowing Yun Shuisheng and Yi Futian to look directly at each other. She should be the one apologizing to me, Yi Futian said grumpily, recalling the memory of that incident. Looking at how intimate Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu were, Yun Shuisheng understood that everything that had happened that day had been a misunderstanding. As such, if Yi Futian was willing to personally clarify his side of the story and apologize to her, then she would have been ready to just let it go. But witnessing Yi Futian's remorseless expression and words made her eyes darken again at how much of an asshole he was. Yi Futian had interrupted Yun Shuisheng training and forcibly taken her away, and now she was to apologize to him? What an arrogant guy, many people thought to themselves. A chill settled upon the space, and Hua Jieyu moved to block Yi Futian from Yun Shuisheng. Older sister Yun, let me persuade him. Hua Jieyu's pretty gaze flicked over to Yi Futian, wondering just what he was doing. She was annoyed that he couldn't just give in for once. Older sister Yun was a pretty girl after all, it couldn't hurt to give in to her. Don't you like pretty girls? Why can't you just give in this time? Hua Jieyu asked Yi Futian mentally, staring at him. Yi Futian was surprised. Chapter 594. Xiang Zhiqin mentioned having let Jieyu off the previous time. Evidently, this was not the first time this sort of thing had happened. Xiang Zhiqin was a grade 5 noble. Against her, Jieyu was at an obvious disadvantage. Xiang Zhiqin mentioned having let Jieyu off the previous time. Evidently, this was not the first time this sort of thing had happened. Xiang Zhiqin was a grade 5 noble. Against her, Jieyu was at an obvious disadvantage. It looked like there really was a tradition of newcomers being hazed at the Holy Ji Palace. May I ask what your relation to Yun Shuisheng is? Walking to Hua Jieyu's side and taking her hand, Yi Futian looked over to Xiang Zhiqin and asked. Xiang Zhiqin shot Yi Futian a glance. She's my senior. Oh, Yi Futian nodded. Jieyu is my girlfriend. If you, a mere junior, can meddle with what happened between me and Yun Shuisheng, then why can't Jieyu speak up for me? Are you an idiot? Yi Futian shot at Xiang Zhiqin. Everyone's stares hardened. Yi Futian's words seemed to make some sense. However, in the world of cultivation it was only one thing to make sense. If Hua Jieyu's plane was higher than Xiang Zhiqin's, then she could have said anything she wanted to, and Xiang Zhiqin would not have dared to do anything about it. However, the situation was that Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu were the weaker ones in this equation. Of course she can, Xiang Zhiqin sneered. If she even wants to battle on your behalf today, that's fine too. So, in the end, you're just lording your seniority over us. Yi Futian chuckled. Well then, let's settle things one by one. As he spoke, he walked towards Yun Shuisheng. The people who had gathered close by dispersed, watching Yi Futian. They were wondering what he was going to do. News of how he had insulted Yun Shuisheng had spread through the Holy Ji Palace. Yi Futian approached Yun Shuisheng, and her cool gaze flickered towards him before he said, "Let me resolve what happened between the two of us. The misunderstanding from before was my fault from the start. I take responsibility for it. But it was a genuine mistake on my part as well. If you think I did it intentionally, then there isn't much point to an apology. You can do as you like then." Yun Shuisheng looked into Yi Futian's eyes. His gaze was clear and devoid of any frivolity. His expression made it easy for one to believe his words. "I believe you," Yun Shuisheng replied. "That would make things easier," Yi Futian said. "When you woke up, I told you it was a misunderstanding and tried to explain. If you had let me do so then, there would have been no problem. Instead, you attacked me immediately without even hearing me out and even said you were going to kill me. Who would have been able to stand that? Furthermore, you chased me all the way to the sky-reaching tower and even wanted to take me away. Many people tried to make me stay then, but how could I be blamed for acting in self-defense? How would I dare to leave with you under that sort of situation?" Yun Shuisheng did not say anything in response. "I understand where you are coming from," Yi Futian continued, "but I hope you can do the same for me too. Whether or not what happened at the cold lake was a misunderstanding, it was my fault. I apologize for what I said at the sky-reaching tower as well. It was uncalled for. It isn't that I am scared of you, I just don't see the need to continuously harp on such a trivial matter, to the point where it even implicates my significant other. You are free to do whatever you want when it comes to me in the future. I'll accept it. But this is purely between the two of us. It has nothing to do with Jeyu, nor does it have anything to do with the Daozong Palace." After speaking his mind, Yi Futian then turned to leave. Watching him walk away, Yun Shuisheng spoke up as well. "Let's put this matter to rest then." Yi Futian stopped at her words and smiled. Then he continued walking forward and approached Xiang Zhiqin. "Now that things between me and Yun Shuisheng have been cleared up, it's time to settle things between us. You've meddled in our affairs twice by this point, once at the sky-reaching tower, and right now at the Daozong Palace. You're even going as far as to bully my girlfriend. Tell me, how should we settle this? Older sister Yun may have forgiven you, but you're still a despicable man. Sneaking up on Wang Yu, insulting older sister Yun. You're in the law rank, yet you choose to lose by default in order to avoid battles. You seem to not know what shame is." Xiang Zhiqin glared at Yi Futian. She had been taken aback by his question. How did he intend to settle this then? "I entered the Holy Ji Palace to train. Not to play these silly games with all of you and participate in meaningless challenges. Furthermore, you do things like issuing challenges to those of a lower plane than you and then forcing them to accept it, or imposing your own views on other people. Then you even crow about it like it's something to be proud of. Maybe it's because you've been spoilt rotten as the princess of the Xiang kingdom. That's why you like to force your self-centered beliefs onto others and believe this is something that is natural and acceptable." Yi Futian shot Xiang Zhiqin a cold glance and said, "Didn't anyone ever tell you that you were being a bitch?" Upon Yi Futian's words, everyone froze and stared at them. If what Yi Futian had said to Yun Shuisheng earlier had carried hints of an insult, then this was full-out humiliation. Yi Futian had entered the Daozong Palace and humiliated Xiang Zhiqin in front of everyone. Xiang Zhiqin's expression changed in an instant. She was at a loss at what had just happened. This was the first time anyone had dared to describe her in such insulting terms. The immense pressure of a grade 5 noble began to spread across the space. Xiang Zhiqin's long hair fluttered in the wind, and the elegance of her demeanor was undercut by a cold rage. Everyone present could sense that Xiang Zhiqin had been genuinely angered by Yi Futian's words. At this moment, a man in white robes strode into view. People gave way to him and stared at the figure walking towards Yi Futian and Xiang Zhiqin. It was Lian Yuqing, a disciple of the Daozong Palace, and fifth in the law rank. Lian Yuqing had a guqin in his hands and was charming in his long white robes that went all the way to the floor. Looking at Yi Futian, he spoke. They say you shouldn't believe everything that you hear. I've heard rumors in the Daozong Palace that the disciple who placed first in the law battle this year was a despicable and shameless person. I always thought that might be an exaggeration, and seeing you come here to the Daozong Palace to apologize to Yun Shuisheng and put this matter to rest made me believe in my own judgment even more. Since you placed first in the law battle, perhaps you might have some flaws, but not to the extent that it is unacceptable. But now I've realized that I may have been wrong in my judgment this time. Using such a term to insult a peer, and a lady at that, I'm extremely disappointed in you, Lian Yuqing continued. He had entered the Holy Ji Palace 6 years ago. In his year, he had placed third in the law battle, and the two people above him were now first and second in the law rank. They were all top-notch individuals. Those who had come on top in the law battle 3 years back were now incredibly well known in the Holy Ji Palace as well, and Yi Futian was the top disciple in this year's law battle. According to precedents, Yi Futian was set to have illustrious achievements and enter the law rank sooner or later. However, his behavior really was quite unacceptable. Yi Futian looked over at Lian Yuqing. With a guqin in his hands, he really was a charming-looking man. Judging by the other disciples' attitude towards Lian Yuqing, though Yi Futian had no idea who he was, he surmised that he probably was held in high regard at the Daozong Palace. However, what did all that have anything to do with him? Am I supposed to care whether or not you're disappointed? Yi Futian shot Lian Yuqing a cold glance. Anyone could stand at a distance and take the moral high ground over something that wasn't their business. Ever since Yi Futian entered the Holy Ji Palace, he had never spoken kindly to anyone. The disciples of the palace were all talents hailed by the people, and all of them were exceedingly arrogant as well. He had wanted to train in peace, but all sorts of troublesome things kept happening to him. Outside the sky-reaching tower, Xiang Zhiqin had ordered people to surround Yi Futian and forced him to choose one of them to challenge. If he lost the battle, then he would not be allowed to leave easily. If Yi Futian had not defeated his opponent that day, who knew what sort of humiliation he would have been forced to face? Today at the Daozong Palace, Yi Futian had only planned to come see Jieyu, quietly listen to Sage Daozong's lecture for a while, then leave with Jieyu. And yet Xiang Zhiqin had jumped on him again. Furthermore, it seemed like he wasn't her only target. Hua Jieyu seemed to have been bullied by her as well, and that Yi Futian could not tolerate. The atmosphere became tense again. No one could believe that Yi Futian had actually dared to talk back to older brother Lian, who was 5th in the law rank. Older brother Lian, in the Daozong Palace, Xiang Zhiqin throws around insults like shameless and despicable on a regular basis when it comes to describing Futian. Even today, in front of everyone, she's talking about him in the exact same way. If she can insult him, why is he not allowed to respond? Hua Jieyu stared at Lian Yuqing, her tone frosty. As a man and the top disciple to emerge from the law battle, it is only right that he is gracious to others, Lian Yuqing replied, looking at Hua Jieyu. You may be 5th in the law rank, but it appears that there isn't much difference between the character of you and Xiang Zhiqin. Hua Jieyu spoke coldly. Lian Yuqing's gaze flicked back to Hua Jieyu, only to see Yi Futian holding Hua Jieyu's hand. There really was no point in trying to reason with these people. Since you all like to force people to accept these supposed challenges so much and expect graciousness from them, then let me see just how gracious all of you people at the Daozong Palace are. Yi Futian looked around at the crowd. I'm Yi Futian, a grade 8 noble. If anyone wants a challenge, I'll gladly accept. Since everyone was quibbling over graciousness, Yi Futian announced his plane to everyone up front. He was going to see if those of a higher plane would be so shameless as to attack him still. Xiang Zhiqin took a step forward before a voice rang out, Zhiqin. Everyone's gaze snapped over to the person who had spoken. It was Yun Feng who walked out and said, I don't agree with this person's behavior as well. Since I'm closer to him in terms of ranking, let me take this battle instead. In the law rank, Yun Feng was in the 96th place, while Yi Futian was in the 97th previously. Yun Feng had claimed before the law rank that this year's entry battle could be a flop. Evidently, he believed that if he had not entered the palace directly last year and entered the law battle instead, he would have been the most dazzling individual. Younger sister, Lian Yuqing said, Yunfeng is a grade 6 noble. He's perfect for this. Yi Futian has defeated challengers 2 planes above him to become the champion of the law battle, and furthermore, your rankings in the law rank are close to each other. A challenge like this will not be seen as bullying. Xiang Zhiqin nodded slightly in agreement. Her expression was still cold as she turned to glare at Yi Futian. She had never been insulted like that before. Yunfeng walked forward, and the people around him scrambled to make way for him. Yi Futian nodded at Hua Jieyu, and she retreated as well. The two were to battle on this sacred learning ground. Yunfeng was very young, and he was fair and handsome. Smiling at Yi Futian, he announced, I'm Yunfeng, a grade 6 noble. I am a painter. Upon finishing his words, a dazzling light shone from behind him and instantly, paintings flew out all around him. It was as if millions of paintings were suspended in the air, with each painting containing immense power within. Yi Futian looked at Yunfeng. Yunfeng's life spirit was similar to that of Yi Futian's 4th older brother's million treasure books. It was very interesting. Looking at the various paintings, Yi Futian's expression suddenly changed. One of the scrolls had an image carved into it. It was a painting of Hua Jieyu. Yunfeng. Hua Jieyu's expression changed as well. Currents of energy rolled off her body, and her eyes were cold. Please don't take offense, younger sister. You burnt my scrolls previously when I was painting after all. But this has always been the way of my training. I will incorporate everything that is beautiful and good in this world into my paintings. It is not to target you. I hope you can understand, Yunfeng explained. There were all sorts of painting scrolls behind him, containing images of people, demonic monsters, ritual implements, and many more. Hua Jieyu's face was pale, and she looked at Yi Futian. Yi Futian's expression was equally cold. Suddenly he rose up into the sky, moving out of the Daozong Palace. Everyone was stunned. Yunfeng followed after him, asking, what is the meaning of this? We'll settle this at the law battle platform, Yi Futian replied coldly. After seeing that painting, he had decided to not battle at the Daozong Palace. Noble will envelop the entire space as spiritual qi rushed towards him. At the same time, powerful spiritual qi gathered into a golden staff. He grasped it and his wings pumped. Yi Futian rose slowly into the air. A starry world appeared around him. Yunfeng stared at Yi Futian. The Yi Futian who'd been known to be lowly and surrender no matter who challenged him seemed to have changed today. He seemed too arrogant to even know his place. Which was his true side? Everyone would know after this battle. His true self would appear after Yunfeng defeated him. An artist is also called a summoner. My life spirit is a picture. Carving thousands of pictures on my life spirit. Observing scrolls and carving scrolls are how I cultivate. Not everyone can enter my scrolls, Yunfeng said coolly. He was clearly talking about Hua Jieyu. This will be the biggest regret of your life. When Yi Futian finished speaking, he stepped forward. I never regret what I do, Yunfeng stated. He waved his hand and countless scrolls started dancing. At the same time, his eyes turned demonic. An extremely terrifying spiritual wind enveloped the sky. All the spiritual qi in the world rushed crazily into those scrolls. These pictures had already been carved. Spiritual qi entering the pictures was his strongest attack. Instantly, all the scrolls dancing in the air floated towards Yi Futian. He was surrounded by scrolls. The various scrolls devoured spiritual qi wildly, exuding shocking auras. All the scrolls seemed to be controlled by Yunfeng's spiritual mind. When Yi Futian was young, he'd met someone who cultivated an art Zhoumu. Yunfeng was clearly stronger than Zhoumu. His life spirit was a picture. All these scrolls were carved in Yunfeng's life spirit. They were similar to spell scrolls. Yunfeng's attacks were like thousands of spell scrolls. However, he must have put in a lot of effort to carve these picture scrolls. Boom boom boom. The scrolls floating around Yi Futian dissipated. Horrible demonic roars sounded. The scrolls actually transformed into various terrifying demons in the air. There were dragons, phoenixes, kirans, xuanwes, rocks, elephants and more. They were like a horrible demon army. Many hearts trembled. This was Yunfeng's first time on the battle platform. He'd been quite well known when he'd entered the pavilion last year, but very few people had seen the craftsman's descendant fight. Now that they witnessed it with their own eyes, they were shaken. No wonder he could enter the law rank as a middle-level noble. Everything in the world could enter the pictures. All spells, demons, and ritual implements could be used by the artist. Artists were also summoners. Every demon that appeared in the air was drawn by Yunfeng. They contained his power and possessed his cultivation plane. It was like an army of mid-level noble super demons. Everyone started mourning inwardly for Yi Futian. It would be difficult to defeat Yunfeng. Various spell scrolls appeared around Yi Futian. Spiritual qi rushed into them, filling them with terrifying power. The light of runes shone and destructive power poured out. This was the Void Scroll skill that he'd learned from Bai Zhe. At the moment, Yunfeng's spiritual energy enveloped the entire battlefield. His expression was cold. Hovering in the sky, he waved his hand. The demon army in the sky started charging towards Yi Futian. The entire battle platform shook at that moment. Almost at the same time, the spell scrolls burst with thunder spells. Purple gold lightning instantly filled the sky with destructive light, covering all the demons. They struck the demons. The demons shook, but they still charged downward. They'd come out of the picture scrolls and didn't feel any pain. But just then, a golden figure from the starry world shot forward, charging across the sky. Starry light dazzled around the figure. There was also a shocking windstorm. It became one with the stars, possessing power that could rip apart everything. Many people saw the golden figure flying below the demons, going forward with the starry windstorm. The scene was majestic. A huge elephant stepped down, wanting to push Yi Futian down. However, Yi Futian didn't try dodging it. The destructive starry windstorm moved up. The moment the giant foot was about to stomp on him, the horrible windstorm arrived and tore it apart. Yi Futian continued soaring. He struck with the starry staff, splitting the elephant in half. Like a golden bolt of lightning, he streaked out of the space, charging towards Yunfeng. Yunfeng's expression didn't change. He waved a wand and various scrolls continued to fly out. There were ritual implements carved on the scrolls. Instantly, swords whistled through the sky. These swords were like the sharpest ritual implements, and they flew orderly towards Yi Futian. Is it controlled by his mind? Yi Futian's expression was cold. Terrifying cold intent descended. The extremely icy intent enveloped the space, making Yunfeng's mind feel bone-numbing coldness. The sharp swords were covered in frost. They slowed down as if they were affected. Boom! The golden rock flew through the sky, passing between the swords. Then another ritual implement created by a scroll arrived. It was a huge and ancient clock. It crashed down, trying to cage Yi Futian in. Yi Futian didn't stop at all. He continued forward. Seeing the huge clock, he struck with his staff again without hesitation. With a loud ring, countless eardrums trembled while the clock was shattered. Such a strong attack. Countless hearts trembled. Seeing Yi Futian continue forward, Yunfeng furrowed his brows. Whooshes sounded. The scrolls behind him flew forward crazily and many heavy mountains appeared. They crushed downward to squash everything. The body that was like a golden rock charged towards a mountain with the staff in front. The horrible windstorm wrapped around the body and he passed right through the mountain. It was destroyed in an instant. The other scrolls also missed their attacks. Yi Futian was getting closer and closer to Yunfeng. Go! Yunfeng waved his hand. Countless scrolls flew out like pages of an ancient book. There were endless rustles as the scrolls blocked Yunfeng. They covered the entire sky. The spells arrived after that. Horrible pressure weighed down, fiery birds shot out, icy rivers swept downward, and meteorites fell down. 3,000 spells were cast at once, destroying the entire space. Boom! Yi Futian disappeared from the spot. The next moment he appeared before a scroll attack. His staff swept over and destroyed it. The next moment he appeared elsewhere. He struck with his staff again and a hole appeared in the sky. He moved towards that hole. The starry world grew more terrifying. A sun and moon hung high in the sky. The sun's fire and the moon's water poured down. Riding the meteorite's windstorm, he fought against the wild law power attacks. Yunfeng looked up with a pale face. Why don't you draw me instead? Yi Futian reached out and grasped Yunfeng's neck. Yunfeng struggled against Yi Futian's hands. There was no color in his face at all. Yi Futian looked back. Flames shot out and burned the scroll that had Hua Jieyu's picture. How did you make it into the law rank? Yi Futian held onto Yunfeng's head and hurled him down. Many people were shaken by this scene. Boom! The battle platform shook. Yunfeng vomited blood. He tried to move Yi Futian's hands, but he obviously couldn't. Below the platform, countless eyes from the Daozong Pavilion were frozen on them. Xiang Zhiqin and Lian Yuqing were especially shocked by this. Yunfeng had been bloodily defeated. Yi Futian still gripped Yunfeng's neck. You all said that I'm shameless and don't dare to fight anyone, he said coldly. Today I gave in, but do you think you qualify? With that, he lifted Yunfeng's body and smashed it down again. So many of Yunfeng's bones broke, but Yi Futian controlled it well. Yunfeng wouldn't be disabled. But even if he couldn't disable Yunfeng, he would still make him remember what respect meant. Xiang Zhiqin's eyes were frigid. She knew that Yi Futian was talking to Yunfeng, but the words were meant for the others too. For countless months, many rumors had mocked Yi Futian. But was it true that he didn't dare to accept anyone's challenge? Was it true that he didn't have the temperament of the pavilion battle's winner? Today Yi Futian told him that it wasn't that he didn't dare. It was his natural arrogance. He didn't care even if people insulted him. Yunfeng's mouth was covered in blood and his face was ashen. He looked mangled. He was a pride too, but today he'd been destroyed like this. Yi Futian was purposely using the cruelest way to humiliate him. Enough! Lian Yuqing asked coldly. Yi Futian looked up and sneered. You're the ones who wanted to fight. Now you're the ones who want to stop. Is this the temperament you spoke of? You're allowed to mock me, but don't let me resist? With that, Yi Futian stood up. Dragging Yunfeng's body, he stepped towards the edge of the battle platform. Many people pitied Yunfeng when seeing his tragic state. Just as Yi Futian had said, Yunfeng probably regretted meeting him now. That handsome, harmless-looking youth was like a demon when angered. This is the challenge that you wanted. Satisfied? Yi Futian tossed Yunfeng's body down the platform. Countless eyes fell upon Yi Futian. This was the winner of the pavilion battle. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.